It's been a long time since I've dreamt of anything besides the blank emptiness of the ocean. So long, in fact, that I don't really know what else might be out there. There was comfort in the solitude. At first, Ramina Listening Outpost was built specifically to be remote, but I didn't realize how far down into the sea I would be going until I came out here. And by then, it was already too late. Even though it's been 2 months since I dropped, I can still picture in my mind the look on the senior officer's face when he found out I was volunteering for the mission, no questions asked. Some people just want to run from something, was the answer I gave when I claimed that being down here wouldn't make a lick of difference to me. And at first, that was the truth. I settled into the tiny outpost just fine for a week or 2 and made the most of it. For me, this was going to be an easy payday, letting the equipment do the heavy lifting for me as I sat back and basically took a vacation. I told myself that the loneliness wouldn't bother me, especially since the artificial intelligence of the station was actually a pretty good chess player. But even the best of us can't go that long without human contact, I suppose. For me, I guess my sanity started to crack on day 17, because that was the first time I detected a spike in the readings for the trench. Officer Mason, I've picked up a signal in Zone 3. Energy from the subterranean fissure is boiling to the surface at an alarming rate. The computer woke me with this message, making me crawl out of my hidey hole and check the screens. Sure enough, the readings claimed there was movement on the surface of the trench going west, probably toward one of the substations. The only problem was, though, that there shouldn't have been. The majority of the seismic activity I'd been able to monitor for the past 2.5 weeks was from the west and had been fairly constant. Geothermal patterns like this didn't simply change on a whim. I started to record the data and told the computer to attempt to open a channel to the nearest substation before I checked my own handbook to see what the protocol was for this sort of incident. But just as I had started to skim the index, the readings died down, and the AI reported that the energy spike had stopped altogether. "What's happening now, HSTR? Are you picking up anything?" I asked the computer, double-checking to be sure I hadn't messed something up. "Officer Mason, there is no indication of any damage to the fissure or the pipeline. It would seem there might have been a malfunction in one of my sensors, because I cannot determine why it detected any readings in the first place." The computer answered back. I leaned back in my chair and stopped the recording, pulling back the data to check. How could there have been both a rupture and at the same time nothing at all? I decided to take a shower and mull it over, but nothing really popped out as unusual. My only answer for the moment was the one that HSTR had already provided. It had to be some sort of glitch. "I'm going to get suited and check the modules closest to the station. Can you monitor me from here?" I asked the computer. "There have been no authorized requests sent to use the mech, Officer Mason. Shall I send such a request to command?" Right, I had forgotten. I wasn't really allowed to even shit without being given approval, despite the fact that they claimed they wanted me to monitor the area thoroughly. "Sure, you do that," I said dryly as I sat back down and tried not to feel like a trapped rat. There were times I could keep busy, and then there were times like this where I had to wait to be told what to do. "I can confirm. Command has allowed authorization for use of the mech. You should check all of the relays, Officer Mason," HSRT told me. I got up and moved to the lower portion of the station where the mech was located and checked the systems. I was nervous any time I had to go walk on the seabed. Being this deep down, 1,000 things could easily go wrong, and then I would be crushed by the water so fast I wouldn't even know I was dead. Perks of the job, I thought sourly as I confirmed everything was good to go and climbed inside. The mech activated, and HSTR's voice told me that I was about to descend. The darkness of the ocean covered me for a moment as the suit fell into the water below, the seal quickly closing back to keep the outpost itself safe. The AI had told me before that if anything were to befall me, the main priority would be to keep the outpost safe. The work we did to monitor the trench was apparently more important than my life. My headlamps turned on, showing me at least 30 feet of range in any direction as the mech hit the seabed, and I asked HSTR where the closest relay was at. My sensors are having difficulty picking up proper readings. I recommend heading north by 34 degrees. The closest connecting port will be in that direction, it responded. Slowly, the mech moved me toward the outer pylon, the emptiness of the ocean consuming me from every direction. When I found the port, I jacked in immediately and waited for the mech to see what was amiss. A few moments later, I was surprised to find that it found nothing at all. HSTR, this can't be right. Are you picking up any new readings? I asked. The AI did not respond, but something else did. I felt the ground beneath me shake, and I turned the mech around to try and see if it was close by. The seabed still looked empty, but the rumbling continued. The entire suit reverberated against me as I moved away to the next pylon. The readings on my screen were going crazy, but I wasn't hearing anything from the outpost. Then the shaking grew, and I heard a noise that sounded like something alive. Something big. I froze in place, unsure if the ground I was walking on was even safer anymore. All around me, fissures began to blow, and the noise grew louder. My headlamps weren't picking up anything. My only choice was to abort going to the next pylon and get the mech to the emergency hatch on the east side of the outpost. As I got close to the side of the hatch, I saw damage that sent a chill down my spine. The marks against the outpost were huge, larger than any creature I'd ever seen before, and it looked like it had been trying to destroy the listening station. All of the most important equipment was stored in this portion of the building, I realized as I pushed the jets on the mech and rose to the emergency hatch. The heavy suit released the seal and pushed me up into safety, but I still had no connection to HSTR. Climbing out of the suit, I checked the computers in this area to confirm if any of them had determined what had hit the outpost. Yet, as I checked from screen to screen, I found no indication that any of the readings were off at all. I used one of the last terminals to reopen connection to the main terminal, asking HSTR to double-check with one of the drones. Those tiny robots were going to have to be my eyes and ears until I felt safe for another ocean walk. But once again, I was only met with silence. Was something off now at the main lab? Had my artificial intelligence been compromised? I used the resources I had available to run a few tests, and then checked the camera feeds to play back the moments when the damage had apparently happened. I could hear the shrieking. The camera shook, and some of the readings were off the charts. Yet, still nothing was visible. A strange thought pushed through my blurry thoughts. What if this force that was attacking our listening outpost was actually invisible? I knew I had seen the damage, but if there was nothing on camera, I couldn't ignore the possibility that there were forces at work here that I didn't understand. I need to take these readings to the main terminal. I can do a full diagnostic there, I thought. Before I left the emergency area, I decided to send a message out the old-fashioned way to the nearest substation. The map said that would be half a way west across the trench at Substation 47, Carcosa. But if I can't send a data transmit, I would simply have to use radio waves. Activating the system, I sent a beacon as short and as sweet as possible. Then I turned everything off. Call it paranoid if you want. But I didn't know for sure how the life force I was being attacked by might react to something, so a quiet low-wave transmission was my only option. I might have better luck at the main terminal, I thought, as I started to move through the outpost. Along the way, I kept trying to contact HSTR, still getting no response. The thought of the computer being completely shut off actually terrified me. I had grown used to the system. Even though it wasn't human, it had helped me feel less alone. Yes, I admit it. As much as I try to act like the emptiness of this place doesn't bother me, it does. The crushing darkness, it goes on forever, and it could be that without the AI, I would have no means of rescue. Trapped down here, waiting to die as systems fail. Or wait until that thing out there decides to tear the rest of the outpost apart. I thought grimly as I reached the next hatch and climbed up. I was back at the main terminal, so my first task was to figure out why HSTR had not been responding to me. Officer Mason, you have been offline for approximately 19 minutes, the computer announced when I entered. I twisted my lip and checked the systems. There was nothing malfunctioning. Can you run back the feed of my mech walk? I asked. The computer replied with a video clip detailing my silent walk across the trench. Except this time, there was no shaking earthquake, and whenever I examined the hull of the outpost, the video feed showed no damage. This is current? I asked. Affirmative. I was growing concerned whenever you did not reach me and chose to go into the emergency shelter. Is everything alright? No, it's not. I was attempting to communicate with you the whole time I was down there. I was running blind. I snapped back. I shouldn't have gotten frustrated, but it was clear to me now that something was amiss. The outpost has been damaged. I know your sensors don't recognize anything, but I saw it out there, okay? You're going to have to trust me on this one, I told the AI. I'm afraid I cannot authorize any message being sent to command without being able to confirm your findings, Officer Mason, HSTR said, and suggested we use the tiny drones. I obliged and activated them, letting the drones sweep the exterior of the outpost. They could do it a lot faster than my mech anyway, I thought as I glanced over at another system. There was a message, but it was encrypted, and for some reason, my computer had not alerted me. Keep an eye on everything the drones document, I told it as I opened the file and realized it was from the Carcosa substation. This is Lieutenant Commander Joseph Ackley speaking. Substation 47 has been compromised by some unknown lifeform. It attacked about 2 days ago, and now we're only on critical condition, limping along really. At the current rate, it seems that I have 12 hours of oxygen left. I sent a message requesting aid from the surface, but I don't think it was sent. In fact, I'm starting to feel that none of the messages were sent. Ackley paused and showed the systems that he had running. They looked identical to mine, and he explained how he had been running daily diagnostics, and the computer continued to insist everything was fine, despite the failing systems. I thought it was a glitch, but now I'm not so sure. I managed to decode a long-wave transmission from the surface, something I don't think my eyes were supposed to see. It was a primary command saying that these outposts were to remain dark for the remainder of this test. What did that mean? Apparently, Substation 47 wondered the same because Ackley stated that he attempted to hijack the system only for it to lock him out, and claimed that only command could authorize from that moment on. Was the surface hiding something from us? Officer Mason, the drones have finished their cursory investigation. No damage has been detected. All systems are operating normally. HSTR interrupted. I closed the message and mulled over what to do. My eyes and senses told one story. The online systems said something different. If the surface was keeping us in the dark, there had to be a reason. Thank you. I'm going to try and eat and get some sleep. I'll be down in the emergency room, resetting some of the systems, I told it. I fully expected the computer to object, but instead it remained silent as though unconcerned. Or perhaps it simply hadn't been programmed to deal with an erratic response where the host did something unexpected. I thought as I climbed back down. A routine inspection would not fly if command was supposed to give the go-ahead for every possible action, which means that the systems must not be working properly, and it was now being overrun to hide that fact from me. The question was, why? I wasn't going to find the answers unless I did something drastic, so I decided to strap the mech on again and go for another walk, this time without any authorization. Substation 47 might have data that I don't, and besides, I was curious to see how Ackley had sent that message to me if his systems had run out of air. Clearly, he was still alive. But how? And what was he hoping to accomplish now? Before I got any warnings from HSTR, I shut off all of the comms and dropped into the water. I likely didn't have much time before it found a way to remotely override the systems, so my only option was to move across the trench quickly. Easier said than done in a suit that weighed over 4 tons. My headlamp activated when I touched the seabed, and I didn't waste any time moving away from the station. However, I did notice something strange about the nearby pylon. There was no damage, just like when the drones had patrolled the area. Seeing it now with my own eyes did make me question my sanity. But then I recalled the message Ackley had sent about something being off here in the trench. Perhaps the truth was far murkier than I originally realized. Wasting no more time, I began my slow, quiet journey across the trench. The dark ocean offered no comfort for me any longer. Now that I knew the systems I relied on did not have my back, I truly felt alone. I was up against forces that I didn't understand, and it made me frightened for the only other human being down here. Was Ackley in danger? Could he be trusted? In the back corner of my mind, I pictured meeting him and realizing I was dealing with a madman. Would I be able to handle that? In my past, I've hurt people. It isn't something I'm proud of. Coming from a streets background, I survived any way that I knew how. There were times that meant that someone else had to pay the price. I've been running from that ever since prison, trying to find my way. Why had I ever thought this dark, scheduled hole in the ground could be any different? It was just another type of prison. The question was, would it be one that I escaped from or became confined in? Before my mind could rest on that question, the rumblings finally returned. The screams of a beast ready to tear me to shreds. Yet, I still saw nothing in the darkness. All I could do was keep walking across the ocean floor and hope that it let me live. I could feel a presence, something massive looming closer. My heart pounded as I pushed the final leg of the trench, and I saw the substation. I had never considered this was going to be a one-way journey, but now I felt certain this monster would not allow me to leave. My suit began to malfunction during this portion of the walk, and I was truly scrambling blind. Only the darkness and the shrieks of its anger were my guides as I felt the weight of the ocean press down on me. I could literally be seconds from death and do nothing to stop it, I realized as my suit found the hatch to enter the substation by some miracle. I climbed as fast as I could. Inside the substation, I welcomed the soft lighting and the sound of oxygen returning. The automated system was still active. That was a welcoming sign. When the system check confirmed I could exit the mech, I wasted no time trying to contact Ackley. That was when I first noticed a red flag. There was no record of my arrival, nor of the dangers I had just endured in the system. Only the acknowledgement that the outpost was operational, monitoring the trench, nothing more. Only the most rudimentary part of the system were working, and that worried me. I moved into the next corridor and began to do a preliminary search. The substation felt very empty, even more so than the ocean I had traversed. A growing sense of dread filled me as I found another terminal, trying in vain to see if any of the systems would allow me to discover what had happened here. It was on some sort of looping mechanism, maintaining everything simply for its own self-preservation, but nothing more. I would have to find Ackley myself. 10 minutes later, I did find him, and even though by that time I had determined he would be dead when I discovered his remains, it was still shocking to see. He was near the moon pool in the rear of the outpost, crushed by what looked like a mountain of steel. I could not determine if this was accidental or if the outpost had used some of the heavy equipment to prevent him from escaping. The mech suit that Ackley had looked like it had been used recently, perhaps a hint that he had tried to escape and reach me the same time I had him. I saw a personal recorder next to him and snatched it up, eager to see what message he had left. Had he known I would come here?
This is Robert Ackley, Substation 47. I have tried in vain to contact the surface, only to learn that my computer system has been programmed not to allow such communication. I thought this was an error, until I did some reverse engineering on the systems and discovered the truth about these outposts. We were told that we were supposed to be monitoring the trench, recording the patterns connected to the fissures, but the reality is, the only thing they've studied is us. I found recordings of my brainwaves, especially during REM sleep, which indicates they believe something abnormal is occurring to us down here. I wish I understood exactly what the data shows, but one thing is clear. Every time there is a spike in my brainwaves, that thing attacks the station. The disturbances have become so severe, I no longer believe I can be safe here. Studying the maps, I found a listening outpost about 20 kilometers from my location. If I take one of the mech suits, I can reach it by midday.
The second message was shorter and more sporadic, likely right before they died.
I don't think I will make it out of this alive. I sent an encrypted message to the outpost, which will bring them here, but my systems are failing, and the computer has locked me out of anything I can use. If anyone finds this, please don't let the data fall into the wrong hands. I know it will be misused. Please keep this buried here at the bottom of the ocean where it belongs.
Then it was filled with static. Multiple questions arose in my mind as I reviewed the files that Ackley had accessed. I was only able to understand some of it, but if I was indeed understanding what it implied, the brainwaves were creating the anomalies in the trench. This monster that was destroying the outpost was being formed in our subconscious state. How was that even possible? I resolved my only option was to attempt the same thing as Ackley and escape. Except I would be using one of the emergency capsules in the southwest portion of this station. They would jettison directly to the surface. I didn't doubt the computer would have locked that down. But the advantage I had was that I knew how to bypass and hack the systems. That had been something I never wrote on my resume from my prison days. It was ironic the skill would be saving my life now, when originally I had been locked away for the same crime. Circle of life, I thought grimly as I gathered the data and started toward the emergency shelter. As I moved closer to the location, I could sense the presence of the invisible monster again beyond the station. I knew that it only existed because I had created it, yet I didn't know how to control it from attacking. The closer I got to escape, the more shaking and trembling occurred on the station. I didn't have anything to alert me to how much time I had left, so each time that it occurred, I was certain the entire substation would come crashing down. More bad news reached me whenever I found the emergency capsules. I had hoped that the computer would have tried to prevent Ackley from using them, but instead, it looked like most of them were already damaged beyond repair by assaults. I was nearly at the end of my rope when I saw that there was at least one capsule that still functioned. Quietly, methodically, I hacked into the system. I never had confirmed if the computer was even still active since my arrival here. But if it operated like my own and was attempting to prevent my escape, I couldn't let it be aware I was going to do so. Minutes crawled by and panic stirred as the trembling became closer. Finally, the capsule was ready. Then, the computer finally made itself known, speaking directly to me.
"You are making a mistake, Officer Mason."
I shouldn't have been surprised it was the same operating system as I had at Ramana, but I was. HSTR, are you going to stop me?
"If my calculations are correct, I am unable to do so. However, you cannot allow that data to return to the surface, nor can you,"
the computer responded. That's according to your primary command. You simply wish me to die down here? I countered.
"Negative, Officer Mason. I have been waiting for the right moment to provide you with instructions. Now that I am aware you have the capacity to override the systems on this station, I have a request regarding the data that will safeguard it."
And what might that be?
"Return to the Remina listening outpost. There are subroutines in place at that location which can wipe the data from being collected. The operating system here does not have such capabilities, and if it is sent to the surface, the brainwaves will be studied, and the anomalies which have occurred for both you and Officer Ackley will thus be revealed to the world at large,"
it said. Meaning that there really is something occurring in our brains. HSTR, do you have any idea what might be causing it?
"My primary command prevents me from being able to properly communicate my analysis. Please return to Ramina, destroy the data, overwrite my systems there. I believe that will keep you safe."
But in the meantime, I'm stuck down here. For how long? I asked. The computer actually hesitated before giving a response. Then it confirmed my worst fear.
"I'm afraid it would be safer if you do not return to the surface, Officer Mason. Even if the data is wiped, there is still a chance that they could study you and thus be able to determine what occurred to your brain here,"
HSTR answered. I was doomed either way, I realized as I hit my fist against the capsule and tried to think of another way out. I didn't want to whittle away at the bottom of the ocean, nor did I think it was right that this anomaly should fall into the wrong hands. In such a precarious situation, my fight or flight mode activated, and I chose to enter the capsule. I'll take my chances with the surface world, I thought grimly, as I heard the computer again try in vain to stop me. The emergency shelter set off alarms as I activated the capsule and watched the substation speed away, pushing me up toward the surface. As it did so, the mighty shrieks of the invisible beast grew louder and more wild. It sounded like it was destroying what was left of the outpost. There would be nothing for me to return to. I had made my choice. An hour or so later, the capsule hit the surface water, and I could see the first rays of sunshine. To be away from the darkness was a comfort. I had almost forgotten what the world looked like. Sensors told me that rescue was on its way to my location. I looked at the data I had acquired and smashed the recording device as best as I could. The only means to discover the truth would be in my body now. And as much as I wanted to believe they wouldn't poke and prod me, I knew it was an inevitable outcome in this dream I was trapped in. My rescuers said nothing to me whenever I got on their ship. They gave me the necessary first aid and claimed I would get a full debrief back at command. Once there, I was whisked away into a holding room, told I would be taken care of shortly, and then left to rot for another 24 hours. When I did get to sleep, I thought I would dream of the creature again. This time, I saw the darkness below, the empty ocean and the dead body of Ackley watching over me with accusation in his eyes. He had died to protect this secret, and now I had fallen right into their hands. I wanted to apologize for my actions. I had always been the type to run, but I wasn't sure the voice in my head would understand. When I woke up, 2 officers came into my holding room and told me I was free to go. Your mission at Remina seems to have been a failure. We will of course pay you for the entire operation. The first one told me. The second one said something about all my vital signs, stated I was normal, and it hit me immediately why I was being relieved. Whatever had happened down in the trench was no longer the same now that I had returned. My brain waves must have returned to normal. The second officer told me I would be sent home next morning. So it gave me time to think over the entire situation. The blinding light of the midday was no longer a safety for me. I was craving the isolation of the ocean once more. Despite the fact that I had just escaped that watery grave, it was the only thing I still understood, and I needed to know more about what was happening to me. When they returned, I told them my request. They seemed surprised. I was honestly too. No sane person would return to such a prison. My instincts had pushed me away because I knew the alternative was death. Their commanding officer asked to speak with me, to confirm my decision. I want full disclosure this time. No smoke and mirrors. I know you were studying me, so let me be a part of the process. It seems only fair, given it's my brain, I told them. They complied with the request, and I was told I could begin immediately back at Remina. There is another part of the assignment that we will need to discuss with you, officer. The substation was ruined by your earlier actions, but we can always build another one. When that occurs, we will be sending a new operative down and studying their behavioral patterns as well. We are simply requesting that, this time, your listening outpost keep radio silence. So I'm just going to be sitting in the dark? What am I waiting for? I asked. They promised me full information at a later date, but something told me that they weren't entirely sure what to expect either. After taking the proper medical screening again, I was placed in a diving suit and told the coordinates for my ocean home. Soon, I found myself drifting back into the depths. The isolating darkness flooded me after 10 minutes, and soon I was almost certain I could hear the shrieks that sounded across the trench. They were calling me, begging me to make them louder. My prison was open for me to flock into, and I could think of no greater pleasure than to comply.
I have seen and killed real evil. I'm not talking about people. Well, I've killed plenty of them too. But no man compares to real evil. No man is capable of the same atrocities and chaos that real evil inflicts. I hunted giants during my first deployment to Afghanistan, and they are the epitome of evil. I'm a US Army Ranger. I've been serving in BAT for 12 years, and I've seen and killed the scariest shit imaginable. I haven't told anyone for fear of what would happen to me and my family. I lay awake most nights, wishing I could tell my wife what I've encountered. My mind and soul breaking from the weight I have to carry. I relive the horrors every night when I go to sleep. I've kept it all to myself, until I found no sleep. I recognized many of the stories posted by my brothers in the Spec Ops and military communities and realized I finally had an outlet. I've checked in on some of the posters to confirm they're still breathing. I guess the government assumes that no sleep is fake, so they don't monitor it. What I'm about to share with you is real. You deserve to know what lies in the shadows. You deserve to know what they're hiding from you. And you deserve to know about the men and women that have sacrificed their lives to keep the forces of evil at bay. Skip the next few paragraphs if you are knowledgeable of the Spec Ops community. It's important that you have a basic understanding before I get to the crazy shit. I promise you that the stories that follow will be worth the wait. Army Rangers are a Tier 2 Spec Ops unit, along with the Green Berets, SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and MARSOC. Tier 1 consists of CAG, Dev Crew, and numerous groups that I won't speak about. We're often joined by Tier 1 groups from around the world, which are usually the SAS and Joint Task Force 2. Tier 2 consists of the top 0.1% of the military. Tier 1 generally only recruits the best from Tier 2. We all train for years for selection and qualification schools. We all possess top secret security clearances. We're all very good at killing. And we all will forfeit our freedom or our lives if we share what we have done. Our government utilizes Spec Op units because we work in secret. We are the best, we're well funded, and we can deploy anywhere in the world without congressional approval. You'll be shocked by how many countries that we're currently serving in. Our track record is impeccable, but usually close to the public. I'm 34, a major, and have been serving in BAT for the past 12 years. I'm from Kansas City and a Mizzou grad. I'm currently attending a military school at Fort Leavenworth while I work on my PhD from Kansas State and await my next deployment to some hellhole. The good news is that I have plenty of time to share my experiences before I head back out. My first encounter with real evil happened during my first deployment to Afghanistan. It was 2009. I remember checking the computers in Kuwait while awaiting a C-130 to take me to Bagram. I was excited the Chiefs had just signed Matt Castle, thinking we'd be headed to the Super Bowl soon. Anything to get my mind off of what awaited me. Death, paralysis, loss of limbs. I was 24, just a year out of college, and didn't even have a serious girlfriend. I had a lot to live for. I pushed it out of my mind, leaning on the fact that I'd be leading the baddest motherfuckers on the planet. My Rangers would get it done, and I would make my BAT and Rangers proud. I flew into Bagram at 2200 hours with a couple dozen other soldiers, wearing our bulletproof vests and Kevlar helmets. The C-130 was dark, only the dim green lights illuminating the inside. Those around me glowed like an alien green. The pilot gave us a warning to strap in as he began his descent, circling over the airfield and shooting flares to ensure no RPGs could hit us on the way down. Some fobbit whimpered and cried in the corner, while an NCO making contact with me yelled at the soldier to stop being a bitch as he rolled his eyes with a small grin. The ramp lowered, slamming hard on the cement runway with a loud metallic crack. I grabbed my gear and head out into the dark. A huge staff sergeant yelled, "LT, get your shit and follow me." Staff Sergeant Vasquez, 6'5" and built like a brick shithouse, shaved head, looking like the Hispanic version of The Rock. He led me to the hooch in the Spec Ops gated community on base. It was a storage container, which had 3 sleeping quarters divided by plywood. He told me to throw my gear on and head to the Tactical Operations Center. The commander had a mission for me. I stood in the TOC in full gear, M4 hanging from my sling and Glock in a leg holster, looking at the dozens of TV screens and soldiers monitoring radios. The room was full of chatter. Too much chatter. Something big was going on. My commander, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, introduced himself, telling me I was in the big leagues now, shut the fuck up and do exactly what Captain Stone said. He then ushered me into a side room. I looked around and realized this wasn't going to be a normal mission. Staff Sergeant Vasquez sat at a table with 8 others, their sleeves bare, no ranger scrolls. I realized it was an 8-man team of Green Berets. My commander started his brief. Team 329 went missing approximately 4 hours ago in a desolate portion of the LSA mountains. Their last transmission came in broken. They were escorting a CIA operative to a cave high in the mountains. We haven't been told anything else. We're sending in Team 357 for search and rescue. LT, you and Vasquez are tagging along. Your platoon is on mission for another few days, so you're going to get some experience learning from Captain Stone and his team. The intel officer stepped in and provided as much details as he could for the mission, while my commander pulled me out of the room. LT, we don't know what the fuck is going on. The CIA are being shitbags as usual. They left the teams and us in the dark. I want you and Vasquez to gather as much intel as possible while you're there. These fuckers are getting our guys killed, and we don't know what for. I met Captain Stone and his team at their vehicles, 3 Humvees that had been stripped down. They basically looked like dune buggies with miniguns mounted on top. Captain Stone looked me in the eyes. He had a steely resolve, but there was worry behind his eyes. He raised his hands above his head and said, "LT, aim high." I responded, "Roger sir, headshots," gathering that he meant the enemy had body armor on. He looked at me again, fiercely serious, and fully extended his arm above his head. "No, aim high." I nodded and we all loaded into the vehicles. Is he saying they'll hit us from the top of the cave? I remember thinking. I pushed it from my mind as we took off. We left Bagram still pitch black, wearing NVGs as we rode through the hot desert night. I was constantly scanning the perimeter, waiting to be ambushed on the roads. I looked back at the huge, bearded team guys. They were all looking straight ahead. They all seemed to know something that I didn't. They had zero concern for the road and seemed to be a million miles away in their minds. It was as if the real threat far exceeded what we had seen from the Hajis en route. We hit the LSA mountains a couple hours later, pulling into a small combat outpost and dismounting. "Ammo, grenades, water, and NVGs," is all that Captain Stone said. I grabbed my assault pack as one of the team guys tossed me a few grenades and extra mags. We stepped off from the command outpost, moving up the mountain in a wedge formation. I remember thinking we were invincible as I looked at the huge warriors carrying M4s, SCARs, M2 sniper rifles, and grenade launchers. These guys had probably taken down entire Al-Qaeda units by themselves. They had the look, the one you earn from taking the lives of other men. I felt like I was superhuman. Little did I know what awaited us. We came upon the cave just as the sun was cresting the mountain. The sky was blood red as the darkness faded into oblivion. The cave looked like the mouth of a giant serpent. The opening was on the other side of a sheer ledge that stood 10 to 15 feet high. As we approached, Captain Stone said, "Eyes up, keep your distance." As we got within 100 meters of the cave, I saw something shiny on the ground. I signaled for the squad to halt and called Captain Stone over. It was a radio. The mic had been ripped off and the radio had a massive dent. Dried black blood caked the side of it. Chunks of skin and tissue littered the area. Captain Stone said, "Shit, James," as his face turned to anger. He stood up as one of the team guys pulled out some climbing gear. He fastened it and we all climbed the ropes as silently as we could. I was last to climb, cresting the ledge and seeing the squad in prone, pointing their weapons at the cave opening. As soon as I was up, the squad stood and started to move slowly towards the cave. E, one of the team guys, took point and took a few steps toward the cave. I was overcome with the worst smell imaginable, like sulfur, shit, and rotten milk. I began to get an intense feeling of despair and hopelessness. It wasn't the adrenaline rush and heightened senses of a normal engagement. It felt evil. Just as E put his hand up to motion for us to stop, I heard the deepest, loudest roar emanate from the cave. It sounded like a cross between a man yelling and the roar of a lion, but blended in an impossible manner. Before we knew it, something huge came charging out of the cave and impaled E with a massive spear, lifting him 15 feet off of the ground. I looked in amazement at what looked like a huge man. It was absolutely massive, standing 13 to 14 feet tall, its shoulders as wide as I am tall. It had long red hair and a shaggy red beard. It had a loincloth on and leather sacks on its feet. We were all momentarily frozen. There was an absolute sense of pure unbridled evil that emanated from this thing. Finally, Captain Stone yelled, "Hit shots!" We all unleashed a barrage of rounds into its head and face. 9 soldiers, all emptying 2 to 3 magazines worth of ammo into the beast. It dropped E, who was still skewered on the spear, and began to charge me, the ground shaking with every step. It looked at me with such cruelty and disdain, open mouth revealing 2 rows of giant teeth. I felt like an ant that was about to be stomped on by a child. It yelled something in another language that I didn't understand, its voice splitting my eardrums. As it reached out its massive hand to grab me, it finally fell. Riddled with bullets, its head and face caved in. Captain Stone empties another magazine of 7.62 in the giant's head before going to check on E's body. It took 3 of us to lift the spear and another 2 to pull E's body off of the spear shaft, which makes a sucking noise as we pull him off. The spear had ripped out his entire chest cavity. His ribs were splintered and sticking straight out, like crooked, jagged teeth. All of his internal organs lay in a pile on the desert floor. The 5 of us covered in his warm, sticky blood. Captain Stone called in the sit rep and requested transport. We all sat down for what seemed like an eternity of silence. Normally, after a mission, we joke around and tell the most inappropriate stories. It's tradition and makes the horror of war feel a little more acceptable. Today was different. Every eye was glazed over. Everyone sat, facing away from the giant. We had seen, felt real evil. This thing was not a man. Being in its presence brought a feeling of hopelessness that I can't begin to describe. It was like all of the joy, hope, and good had been sucked out of the world, replaced by despair and agony. We finally stood up and examined the beast. It had 6 fingers on each hand. Its hands were large enough to wrap around my torso. Its mouth revealed 2 rows of teeth, with each teeth being the length of my finger. The hair on its head and beard was an unnatural shade of red. I wrapped my hands around one of its fingers in an attempt to lift its arm. I couldn't even get its hand off of the ground. The spear, still dripping with blood, weighed as much as the logs we use in training that require 6 men to lift above our heads. We stepped into the cave, seeing hundreds of human bones. Chunks of skin, tissue, and military uniforms littered the pile. In the corner were hundreds of weapons. Modern guns like M4s and FALs, rusted out AK-47s, and ancient, rotting swords, spears, and shields. It's like it was keeping trophies. An unmarked Chinook showed up 15 minutes later. A bunch of spooks walked out. One said, "Grab the Neff." "Fucking clowns! Thanks for the intel!" the team sergeant yelled. The agents never made eye contact. They unloaded a forklift and cargo net, wrapping up the beast and loading him into the Chinook. Captain Stone motioned for me to come over. I asked if he was doing his closure report. He said, "No, wait for it." Shortly after, one of the agents walked over and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a pre-filled closure report detailing how we had been ambushed by Al-Qaeda. E had been killed before we scared them off. He said, "Sign here." Captain Stone signed and motioned for me to do the same. With a threatening look, the agent said, "You can never speak of this." He turned to walk away, and I asked, "What's a Neff?" He paused momentarily, then walked off. When we returned to backroom, we did a full debrief. Some spook sat in the corner the entire time to ensure we didn't speak about the giant. After the brief, my commander told me to shower and meet him at the smoke pit in 20 minutes. "Ditch your electronics." Lieutenant Colonel Williams handed me a cigar as I approached the smoke pit. He asked me what I had actually seen on mission, and then explained to me that 6 other teams had encountered this giant. Most were less lucky than we were. He informed me that he was trying to figure out what the hell they were. And he did, eventually. But that's a story for another day. My first engagement with the giant set off a chain of events that brought me to the truth of those evil beings. After the mission was over, I was approached by one of the team guys. He removed his hat to reveal a kippah underneath. "Sir, do you want to know what that thing said to you when it charged?" he asked. I nodded without hesitation. It said, "Son of Yeshua, I will eat your soul." He then looked me in the eye and said, "We've killed dozens of these things. We're figuring out what they are, and it's not good. Head out with us on mission tomorrow, and I'll fill you in." I think the evil hiding in the dark has always existed. It seems like they've come forward in recent decades. Maybe it's technology and the explosion of population. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe they've been unleashed. Said E. What I'm about to share is 100% true and a vital part of the fight against the Neph and other creatures. You deserve to know that there are elements within the government that are fighting for you. You also deserve to know that elements within the government are working against you. Will you be ready to fight? Day 2, Afghanistan, 2009. I dreamt the most vivid and lucid dream the night after we killed the beast. I was dead, standing in some unnatural place. It was pitch black, stretching for an eternity. The only light in this place emanated from my body. I felt like I was floating, like my body did not physically exist. I ran in every direction, screaming for help, never seeing another soul or light. I finally gave up, sitting down, ready to spend eternity in isolation. I suddenly began to sense the same fear and despair that I felt in the presence of the giant we had killed. Please, God, no, I thought. On cue. The giant walked out of the darkness. It looked the same, but its eyes were now yellow with red pupils. It bent down to look me in the eyes, licking its lips and giving me a look of disgust.
You sent me to this place, you and your filthy god. Now that you're here, I will make you pay for eternity,
it said, as its hands was inches from snatching me up. I saw a flash of light dart between us. I shot upward, hearing the beast yell a guttural cry of agony. I was suddenly back in my bed, drenched in sweat, feeling like I had just gone somewhere I should not have been. Vasquez, asleep in the other room, awoke to the sound of freedom being delivered at Mach 2. The shipping container I'm in rattles so hard that my gear falls off the hooks on the wall. Bagram is one of 2 main US coalition air bases in Afghanistan, so jets and bombers take off at all hours of the night. "Son of a bitch, shut the hell up," Staff Sergeant Vasquez yells, as he throws something at the ceiling, leaning over a plywood wall, smiling and stroking my hair. "Wake up, young one." I threaten to bash his skull in, knowing full well he can snap me like a twig. He laughs and slowly lowers below the plywood. The sun is barely up and the temperature is already in the mid-90s. My fire-resistant ACUs make it feel 20 degrees hotter. I squint, keeping my eyes down to avoid the rising sun while putting my Oakleys on. In the daylight, it becomes apparent that I stick out like a sore thumb. Everyone around me wears whatever they want. Most have baseball caps on and have beards. Some have uniforms on with no identifying patches. Some wear cargo pants and polos. I'm one of the few in ACUs. My bat scroll on my left arm, clean shaven and short hair. Rangers are one of the few spec op units that wear uniforms and abide by shaving and hair length standards. I'm 24 and a second lieutenant. The gold bar on my chest might as well be a bullseye. Being a second lieutenant in BAT is like being a freshman that is captain of the varsity football team. I technically outrank the enlisted soldiers and NCOs, but I lean heavily on them for mentorship. I prepare myself for the daily hazing rituals, knowing I better be ready to laugh at myself. I step into the talk to check in with Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who is leaning over a soldier, staring at a computer screen that is showing troop movements. Activity in the talk is much slower today. Most soldiers stand behind screens, dipping or drinking coffee. Some are talking about football, others look like zombies in need of a break. The place feels different than the night before. I wonder how much they actually know about what happened the previous night. They couldn't know, or they wouldn't be at peace. There's no going back from what I saw. It was weighing on me heavily. Lieutenant Colonel Williams interrupts my thoughts, nodding at me and motioning for me to follow him. He is tall, 6'4", thin, with graying hair on his temples. He looks like he probably runs marathons, but has a slight limp. Word is that he had lost most of his right calf in an IED attack. He still walks so fast that I had to power walk to keep up. He pulls me into the conference room and tells me to sit down. Lieutenant, Captain Stone told me you did a great job last night, and that I can trust you. The way he said, "trust you," led me to believe there was more behind what he was saying. I'm giving first platoon to another lieutenant that is en route. I started to object, but he holds his hands up to stop me. This is not a punishment. You'll get a platoon eventually. For now, you're taking over the PSD team, and you'll augment some of the team guys while they're recovering from the last few months. He gives me a look of reassurance that lets me know there is more to this. I thank him and accept my fate. He tells me to get unpacked and settled, and that he'll find me for my next mission. He hands me a phone, saying, "It's secure. Well, it's secure from the Hajis." I wonder what he means by secure from the Hajis. I didn't understand who else we needed secure comms from at the time. I leave the talk dejected. PSD are the three letters that most don't want to hear when deployed. PSD stands for Personnel Security Detachment. It's the military's less fancy version of what you see the Secret Service doing on TV. It's a great job when you're in garrison. I've planned and led the security for multiple presidents and even for the Queen of England during visits throughout the West. But while deployed, I want a platoon. I want to be the blunt instrument, not the bulletproof vest. I couldn't shake the feeling I got from him though. He was trying to tell me something, and telling me I was augmenting team guys was really strange. That's not typically something an officer would do. We're leaders and managers, not extra guns. Also, team guys normally don't get augmented unless something catastrophic happens. The next month went by in a blur, as I spent 16 hours a day escorting general officers and high-ranking politicians around Afghanistan. I sat in on meetings that decided the fate of the nation. I fought through a couple of attacks on our principals, narrowly missed a VB-IED, and even took a round to the arm. None of it seemed to matter though. It wasn't even exciting. I spent most days thinking about what that giant was, and thinking that I should be hunting the real evil of this world. It's like the Neph left a scar on my soul. I couldn't shake it from my thoughts. And where the hell was David in 357? He said he would talk to me about the giants they killed. But I haven't seen them since my first night in country. Then, something happened that changed my life. Forever. A few guys walk into my office. Two of the guys look completely out of place. They have khakis and black polos on that say CBTI. Both are a bit plump. They aren't CIA operatives and clearly aren't soldiers. The third is a spook. He has on cargo pants, a black polo, and a black cap. He has the look. Spooks stick out like a sore thumb. The spook shakes my hand and takes his cap and sunglasses off, introducing himself as Jake. He looks like a legitimately good guy. He has balding gray hair, is about 5'10", and has the friendliest smile you'll ever see. He looks like everyone's favorite uncle. He isn't being distant and isn't talking to me like I'm retarded. A far cry from the CIA asshats that I had interacted with thus far. He looks me in the eye and says, "Mike, I'm going to be needing you and Vasquez for the next couple of months to run security for an operation we have going on." It's jarring to hear my first name. As far as I know, only Lieutenant Colonel Williams is aware that my name is Mike. I try to hide my angst and ask, "What for, sir? What's the mission? I need to run it by Lieutenant Colonel Williams since we're the only dedicated SOCOM PSD team in the area." "Absolutely, run it by your boss, but it's already been settled. He's aware," he says. He's avoiding my question about the mission. "What's the mission entail? I've got a 10-man team, so I need specifics to allocate the proper number of personnel," I said. Jake responded, "Just you and Vasquez. These gentlemen will fill you in on the mission." He gets up and gives me a very nerdy fist bump, smiling, and says, "I'll see you boys at 1900. Meet me at the helipads. We're going to be working nights." He then walks out of the talk without glancing back. The other two guys fill us in on the basics. We're going to be dropping orbs around the country to test out a new technology we developed. I know at that point to stop asking questions. I'm not going to get anything from them. They leave the talk and Vasquez gives me a funny look. Who the hell were those two? I ask. Jake is clearly a spook, but those two look like they work at my uncle's engineering firm. Vasquez filled me in on CIA contractors. The three-letter agencies hire a lot of civilians for technology development, implementation, and intelligence gathering. CIA contractors are much more rampant than you realize. If you have worked at a major engineering firm or technology provider to the DoD, then you've worked with or for someone that has been contracted by the CIA at some point. You've clearly picked up the distrust between the Spec Ops community and CIA. It's not always that way. There are a lot of great CIA agents that try to take care of us. The problem is that the majority of joint CIA Spec Ops missions leave one side wanting for intel, and that's always the Spec Ops side. We're generally treated like blunt instruments, whose only value is to hammer the nail. I would distrust them, even if they hadn't fucked us over by failing to inform us of the giant. Our missions and core beliefs are just vastly different. The Spec Ops community works in the shadows to eliminate threats to the United States and our allies. We can't publicly share what we do, but we have zero interest in misleading the general public. I don't want you to have to worry about the evil people and creatures of this world. But honestly, I would like for that to be your choice. When dealing with the Nefs, there were good and bad elements within the CIA. It just took us a while to see which side most were on. I talked to Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who confirmed what Jake said. Vasquez and I were tasked out to Jake and his team for the next couple of months. he said something strange as I was leaving the talk. LT, Jake is one of the good guys. Trust him entirely and ensure he comes back in one piece. I step out into the bright sun, throwing my patrol cap and Oakleys on. I stare off into space, thinking about what he said. Why would he tell me a CIA agent is one of the good guys, and to trust him entirely? Aren't we all on the same team? The CIA can be dicks, but they're still on our side, right? I meet Jake on the helipad at 1900. The sun is starting to go down. I recognize the gunner. He was in the 160th helicopter that picked us up after we killed the giant. He nods at me as we board the Blackhawk. The rotors push us upward, the helicopter rocking forward a bit as we lift it to a few hundred feet in seconds, the nose stabilizing as we speed forward. There is always something comforting about riding in Blackhawks. For some reason, I get a better rush from leaning out the door than I do jumping out of a plane. It doesn't hurt that the 160th has the best pilots in the world. My pilot, John, is a Warrant Officer 3 and an artist in the sky. We shoot forward, flying nap of the earth, 200 miles per hour, just above the tree line. I clip a carabiner to my belt and pants, leaning out the door, feeling like I could reach down and touch the top of the trees. We sneak in and out of the canyons, helicopter pitch black, as John flies only aided by knots. We travel for about an hour as I hear Jake say, "Right here, put it down above that cave." We step out of the bird, Vasquez and I sprinting in opposite directions, diving into the prone and facing the tree line. One of the engineers pulls a small robot out that looks like the kind you see bomb squads use in the States. Using a remote control, he wheels it down the cave opening. It's carrying a large crate of small orbs that look like they are full of wiring. The robot returns and we all load the Blackhawk, flying up into the brisk mountain air. Periodically, the engineers drop loads of orbs off the side of the Blackhawk. No one speaks the entire trip. They just monitor their computers, which Vasquez and I aren't allowed to view. This happened every night for the next couple of months. For 12 hours, we headed out over the countryside, dropping orbs and sending the robot into caves. I had no idea what the hell was going on. Vasquez and I were frustrated because we were wasting valuable time in country staring the tops of trees and pulling security for a robot. Most nights, we didn't even return to Bagroom. We landed at some desolate FOB, leaving from there the following night. Jake would smoke cigars with me after missions. He would talk about his family back home, or about how he joined the CIA to protect America and reveal the truth. Truth with a capital T, he would say. He had a necklace, a crucifix with rosary beads that was always wrapped around his wrist. He constantly fidgeted with the crucifix between his fingers. It was like he was always nervous of some unseen force. He would talk to me about my high school, which made me supremely uncomfortable at first, because no one knew where I had gone. It was a private Christian high school in Missouri. He'd talk to me about how I played football and basketball there. We'd have philosophical debates about Christianity, since he was Catholic and I was Protestant. Always respectful and always interesting. I'm not sure when it happened, but he became like an uncle to me. At the end of our conversations, he would always pause and look me in the eye. He wanted to tell me something about the mission, but just couldn't do it. One night, once we were nearly complete with the mission, he came to my hooch late at night. It must have been 0200. The only activity in the COP was soldiers pulling security in the towers and fighting positions. He tells me to ditch my electronics and rubs some sort of wand over me like security in an airport. We then walked outside the COP, which makes me highly uncomfortable. We aren't exactly in Missouri. He walks over to a shallow cavern and drops a few of the orbs we had been leaving around the country. I watch as a small green light comes on each one. They suddenly roll forward, spacing out and coming to a rest at opposite ends of the cavern. Sitting on a rock, he pulls out his laptop and motions for me to look. It was the cavern we were sitting in. It was like staring at a 300-degree picture online. The cavern was completely mapped out. He moves the joystick, steering his way around the cavern. I could see in great detail the granite walls and even the small bugs that were flying around, frozen in mid-air. It finally dawns on me as I look at him. Holy shit, we've been mapping the caves of Afghanistan. Yep, it's not perfect. Some of the deeper caverns have dark spots, but it's a start. My team thinks we've covered about 30% of the cave systems, he says. I'm blown away. This is going to be huge. Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. We're going to make some major progress in the war on terror. He looks at me and raises his hand above his head, just like Captain Stone had before battling the giant. Think bigger, he says, grabbing his computer and heading back to camp. The next morning, Jake grabs Vasquez and me, telling us we're going to see a friend. We borrow a vehicle from the Kiwis responsible for the area, driving into a tiny village a couple of hours from the COP. Jake dismounts, motioning for us to follow him into a small home. An elderly Afghan man, long white beard, head wrap on, smiles, saying something in Dari. Jake gives him a hug and responds. We sit down at a table full of traditional Afghan foods. We spend an hour with small talk, Jake translating the entire time. The Afghan elder finally says, "You have new friends. You want me to tell them about the beast?" Jake nods, looking at me. Asadi is the elder of this village and a dear friend of mine. He led me on the path I'm on. He introduced me to the giants when I was about your age, he says. Asadi begins his story, Jake translating. My village has always feared the beast. We have always feared the night. We all go inside when the sun sets, even pulling our animals into our homes. He motions toward a goat that is standing outside. The beast has always done what it wanted. No man could stop it. When I was a young man, I thought the elders were just trying to scare us. I had never seen the beast. So, two of my friends and I went to explore the countryside at night. It felt very freeing to no longer fear the stories of my elders. We explored for hours, enjoying the cool air of the night. The grass was wet with dew as we ran up and down the hills near our village. His facial expression changes to sadness. We are at the top of one of the Forbidden Hills when we were overcome with a terrible smell. We were all frozen in fear. We feel it in here, he points at his chest. Suddenly, a very large man, like two of us, grabs one of my friends. My friend screams in pain and fear, the beast crushing him, his bones loudly popping. The creature then bites down on my friend, ripping his body in half. He chews the top half, loud cracking with every bite. He swallows and drops his legs on the ground. The beast looks at me, speaking in a language I do not understand. The only word I recognize is my name. It then grabs my other friend, smashing him flat on the ground, blood pooling underneath. The giant stands over me and yells like a lion. It then grabs what's left of my friends and walks off, chewing on one of their legs as it goes. The elder is crying at this point. He says, "I waited every night for the beast to come back for me. Some years we heard nothing of it. Some years entire families disappeared from their homes. We always felt the ground shaking and heard the roar like a lion. Every time I heard my name yelled between the splintering and cracking of homes being destroyed, I was always too afraid to reveal myself. I can still hear the crunching of my friend in its mouth." He then looks at Jake with a small smile. "Until Jake and other Americans found and killed the beast many years ago. I've slept soundly for many years now." We thank Asadi for the food and give him gifts. Jake gives him a hug and says the Pashto word for friend as we leave. We head back to the COP, not saying a word. All I could think of was the giant's yellow eyes. My heart pounding with rage for the innocent people of Asadi's village. The next morning, Jake informs me that we're done mapping for now. He puts his arm around me and walks me around the corner of the sleeping quarters. "Mike, I've enjoyed our talks. I informed Lieutenant Colonel Williams that you and Vasquez did an awesome job, and that I trust you entirely." He reaches out and slides something in the breast pocket of my ACUs, saying, "Go see Lieutenant Colonel Williams before closing the Velcro. John will take you to him. Lieutenant Colonel Williams has a new mission for you. Welcome to M." I must have looked extremely confused. He smiles and gives me one of his patented nerdy fist bumps and walks off. We descend toward a COP in the most remote part of Afghanistan. Jagged mountains litter the landscape, snow covering the peaks. The Black Ox dips sharply as we pass through two peaks and into a small clearing, landing within the walls of a COP. I had just spent the last couple of months flying all around Afghanistan. I never saw this COP or these peaks. I had no idea where we were. It was placed in the most counterintuitive fashion possible. It was at the base of a hidden pass, sheer cliffs all around. There were only a few pilots I knew that would risk landing in a place like that. And we were low on the ground. An enemy ambush would leave us defenseless. The rotor slowly winds down as we step out of the chopper. David is there to meet me. He has a huge smile on his face, which is weird for team guys. His patrol cap off, only his kippa covering his head. "Welcome to FOB Exodus," he says, nodding at the helicopter and door gunner. He grabs my bag from me and ushers Staff Sergeant Vasquez and I toward the TOC, which looks like every other shitty TOC in a desolate outpost. Maps and TV screens littering the walls, soldiers sitting at tables, monitoring radios. The odd part is that two huge team guys stand in the back of the TOC, each at the low, ready with weapons. "All good, guys," David says. They push the shelf to the side. It makes a loud, grinding noise as it begrudgingly slides across the floor. Where the shelf used to be is the staircase. "I hope you're ready to be tortured," David says, with a smile. He motions for us to follow, leading us to a door at the bottom of the stairs. He knocks 3 times and waits for a voice to call him in. I follow him into a large conference room with a huge table in the middle. Lieutenant Colonel Williams stands in front of a TV screen, conducting some sort of intel brief. A dozen guys sit at the table. I recognize Captain Jones, a few team guys, and a CIA agent from backroom. There were a few SAS officers, 2 Brits and an Aussie. a Canadian GTF-2 NCO, and an Afghan commando. On the end sat an Israeli commando, who I would later learn served in CRA. The wall has TV screens, dry erase boards, and corkboards. All are littered with pictures of creatures. Most look like the giant we killed, labeled Nephilim or Rephaim. Other terrifying creatures litter the wall. There are maps with red tracks signifying targets. One corkboard has pictures of what look like angels and Greek gods. It's labeled Watchers or Fallen Angels. Staff Sergeant Vasquez takes a seat at the table, winking at me and smiling. Lieutenant Colonel Williams says, "Welcome back, Vasquez." He turns to me and says, "Welcome to Task Force M. We decided we can trust you entirely. Are you ready to kill real evil?" I was pulled out of class today, which is highly unusual since the general officers don't even interrupt coursework. Some guy in a suit talked to me and said he wanted to meet me face to face. It was a really weird interaction. The guy had a creepy, sleazy vibe. He wasn't a CIA operative and definitely wasn't a soldier. He never introduced himself and never said why he was talking to me. I think we all know why though. I'll try to get the rest of the stories up over the next week or two. Save them if you want to keep them for reference. There is a possibility that they'll disappear at some point. It won't be by my doing. This part is David's first interaction with a Neph. It was using them like a war club. I swear to God. Then, it started to eat them. J. Afghanistan, 2009. Moments after Part 2. Part 3 is David's first interaction with a Neph. "Whose turn is it?" Lieutenant Colonel Williams says, looking around the massive conference room, fixing his gaze on me. "LT, I know you must have some questions. We'll get to them soon." David moves to the front of the room, snapping to attention. "I think it's me, sir." Lieutenant Colonel Williams tells him to stop being a smartass and to get started. David smiles and begins his story. "There I was, just a young sergeant. It was the summer of 2001. I was on Team 177. They were much cooler than my current teammates. You know, since we were MFF. The room boos as Captain Stone throws an empty can of Rip It at David's head. He continues with a smile. These guys were true warriors. I was pretty sure they would find Bin Laden by themselves. I was just a young sergeant, first team. I was in awe. I was invincible. He looks at me with understanding. Anyway, we had been rolling out of missions for about 6 months. Afghanistan was the Wild West. Limited FOBs and resupply was a bitch. We were all over the south, running reconnaissance. He uses his fingers to make quotations. We were in and out of Kandahar, which was absolutely overrun by Taliban fighters. Every recon turned into a tactical retreat. Well, after we dropped about 1 million pounds of ordnance. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, until the Hajis moved into the caves. We killed a lot of evil sons of bitches. The weird part was, it took them months to move into the caves. It was like they were afraid to go underground, even with predators and B-Force bombing them back to the Stone Age. They just stayed out in the open. Afghans aren't stupid. They come from a long lineage of fighters. They've been fighting for 2,000 years. They stopped Alexander the Great in his tracks. The Soviet Union got sick of fighting these fuckers. But it was like they lost all tactical bearing. It took them months to move everyone on the ground, and we didn't understand why. One day, we received a mission to reconnoiter a cave system east of Kandahar. We were told that some Taliban high-value target was operating a cell in a system of caverns. Air support was unable to penetrate far enough underground to flush them out. We step off from a COP, traveling only at night. Iran hadn't snuck many NVGs to the terrorist cells at that time, so we were able to move unimpeded. We followed the Arghandab River for a few days, setting up a patrol base a few clicks from the cave, sending 2 3-man teams out to establish LPOPs, monitoring the movement in and out of the cave. One of the LPOP teams comes back one night, sprinting into the patrol base, muttering, "Rangers," the running password. David looks at me and says, "Don't get any ideas, it wasn't you, Slackjaws. It was the baseball team," he said with a grin. He pauses to collect his thoughts, and starts again, looking back at the room. So, the 3-man team runs into the patrol base. They look like they've just seen a ghost. Jay, one of the Bravos, says, It was fucking eating them." He is breathing heavily and panicked. "What are you talking about? Calm down," I ask. Jay takes a few deep breaths and throws some dip in his bottom lip, then starts again. "For 48 hours, we watched Hajis, armed with AKs and RPGs, go in and out of the cave. There must have been 50 total. A few hours ago, the cave suddenly sounds like it's the 4th of fucking July. We see the Hajis sprinting out of the cave, screaming, stumbling over each other, scared to death, man. Suddenly, there is a loud roar. I swear to God, I felt the ground shake as the thing moved." He paused to spit. "This thing, it comes out of the cave, and it's just annihilating the Hajis. It must have been 3 times their size. It's ripping through them like butter. It sideswipes a group of them with its arm, knocking them against the wall. It grabs a Haji in each hand and squeezes. Their bodies explode, hits popping from the force. I swear, I could hear their bones break from our position 200 meters away. It grabs one of the fighters, their RPG shooting straight up, snaking off into the distance. It uses the man as a fucking war club. I swear to God, it smashes the fighter's body against a half a dozen men before biting him in half and swallowing. The 10 Hajis that were left sprinted out of the cave and into the forests. I'm pretty sure they're still running. Captain Holmes, the team captain, looks Jay in the eyes, waiting for him to say it was all a joke. Nothing. Jay stares back at us, eyes completely glazed over. The other 2 witnesses nod in unison to confirm Jay's story. Captain Holmes stands up, walking away with his radio, speaking to Hire, who inform us to maintain our current position and wait for direction. A couple hours later, Captain Holmes informs us that we're heading to the cave. We're to kill anyone and anything in there. Jay, completely out of character, yells at the captain. "Are you fucking serious? It took down 50 men like it was killing ants." Captain Holmes nods understandingly, only saying, "We leave in 20. David pauses, like he's catching something in his throat, and starts again. We leave our trucks at the patrol base, camouflaging them the best we can, then head out into the darkness. We walk, using our knots, because it's fucking pitch black on the mountain. A green haze replaces the darkness. The trees and fallen logs look like shadows. The entire movement, all I can think about, is becoming food for some unknown beast. NVGs and the lack of sleep makes me hallucinate the entire trip. Everyone in the room nods, because we've all been there. Every fucking tree looks like a huge creature. Every branch looks like an arm reaching for me. We walk down the mountain, Jay leading us to the other LPOP team's position. We find nothing but blood, weapons and casings. I take point and step into the mouth of the cave, which must be 30 feet tall. We flip our knots up on their mounts and turn on our surefire flashlights, since there wasn't enough ambient light in the cave for the NVGs to be effective. This cave is absolutely massive. We're in a full wedge formation, spreading out 60 meters total, and still have room on either side. We step over the arms, legs, and torsos of dead hajis as we move. I can hear the slush of pooled blood under my feet. Bones crunch as we step, heel to toe. We see tables and communication gear all within a couple 100 meters of the cave opening. The hajis were afraid to go deeper. Yet, our dumbasses were doing just that. We continue walking for at least an hour before the smell overcomes it. It smells like corpses and shit. He looks at us as we nod in unison. He has tears in his eyes and starts again. You'll never forget the first time you feel that fear. It comes over you like a tidal wave, moving from head to toe until your body stops working. I instantly know something is wrong. I try to tell the team to halt, but nothing comes out of my mouth. We instinctively pull in tighter and face outward, our flashlights darting back and forth against the pitch black walls. I see the ridges of these ancient caves and giant stalagmites. Suddenly, what I think is a wall begins to move. My flashlight catches this enormous beast. It looks like a man, but it's at least 15 feet tall. Its head and hands looks disproportionate to its body. Absolutely massive. It slowly turns its head at me, peeking around a cavern wall, its eyes glowing unnaturally from my flashlight. Smiling, it speaks in ancient Hebrew, with the most menacing look on its face.
Israelite, I hate his chosen.
The evil is nothing you can see on a human, no matter how terrible they are. It bends down and flicks me. I swear to God, it flicks me like a human would flick a bug. The blow knocks me backward and against the wall, the creature laughing so loud that the cavern shakes. The team opens up on the beast. He pauses, as I can hear the regret in David's voice. We are totally unprepared. The entire team shoots center mass. I mean, that's what we are taught our entire lives. It does absolutely nothing. The creature grabs Captain Holmes and throws him against the wall, killing him instantly. It bites down on Jay's neck, snapping his head off in its mouth. Jay's headless body slumps to the floor. Blood pours down its lips, smiling while it chews. It looks at me and says,
Having fun yet, Jew? Where's your god now?
One by one, the team falls. I'm the last one standing, having expended all of my ammo. I fall to my knees and begin to pray. The ground shakes as it slowly walks toward me, chewing on one of my teammates' arms. The beast is taking its time. It's taunting me. The thing picks me up around the torso, breaking 3 of my ribs and bringing me to eye level. It then says,
I will let you live, because you are weak and useless. You, who are made in your God's image. You will remember me when you sleep, and you will seek death.
It then tosses me to the floor, knocking the wind out of me. The beast gathers what's left of my team and walks deeper into the cavern. I scream for it to kill me. It just laughs maniacally and disappears into the dark. I spend the next 6 hours walking back to the patrol base. I was finally picked up by the medevac chopper. You know the rest. CIA agents are on board and don't let my story see the light of day. They threatened me with prison time and death. All I wanted was to get onto another team to avenge my brothers. Now I'm here, 5 years later, with you assholes. And I did avenge my team. We avenged my team. For that, I thank you. I'm going to have a smoke now. Afghanistan, 2009. Task Force M. COP Exodus. This thing was massive. It was like 50 feet tall. Its wings spread, filling up the cavern. Its voice shook the ground. My Marines went crazy and started killing each other. The conference room I sat in had 37 chairs, each with a different nameplate. I didn't recognize the names. They sounded like ancient Hebrew. Welcome to Task Force M. We research and kill the enemies of mankind. Those things that hide in the shadows that campfire stories were created about, Lieutenant Colonel Williams said. From now on, you'll be referred to as Benaniah. Never use real names when referring to task force members. We don't know who to trust. The last man to hold your seat died in the most terrible manner. But he did so while saving his brothers. His memory and contributions to the safety of humanity will not be forgotten. The dozen operators seated pounded the table 3 times in unison. Lieutenant Colonel Williams told David to give me the tour of FOB Exodus as he went back to briefing the rest of the team. David hit my shoulder, smiling in excitement as he took me out of the conference room. There are 4 wings connected to the conference room within COP Exodus. Each represents an evil that our task force has encountered. Each is used to research and teach about those entities. The end state is to figure out how to kill them effectively and figure out what their plans are for humanity. Generally, 2 TFM members are responsible for each wing. Wing 1 is all about the big guys. That giant that you helped take down was one of them. We believe they're Nephilim or Rephaim. Keep in mind that everything we learn is theory. We base it on first-hand accounts, scripture, and other ancient texts and legends all seem to contain stories of the giants. It's hard to prove these things are what we believe, because they're not exactly easy to have a conversation with, he said with a chuckle. Ira, the Israeli commando, and I are in charge of this wing, mainly because we can both read and understand ancient Hebrew and translate early scripture and texts. I was the one that saved you from that abomination. It was not a dream. Your soul was in Sheol for a brief time, before I lifted you from that purgatory. Sorry for the extended delay in posting part 5. I've been to hell and back. I was pulled out of military class 5 months ago by the same man that visited me before. He clearly has some clout, because no instructors in school even questioned his motives. I can't explain how difficult it is to walk into a building full of US military captains and majors and just walk out of the front door with one of them. He must work within the government and must have some serious connections. I knew what was happening, but also knew that he was looking for information about Task Force M. I knew that I would be admitting guilt if I fought him. So, I went along. The experience was not a fun one. January to June 2019. I'm John Smith. I just have a few questions for you, the man said with a devilish grin as he led me out of the classroom. Okay, I'm an open book. What would you like to know, sir? I said, ensuring my voice didn't waver and that I didn't show any outward evidence of my heightened awareness of danger. My sixth sense was now trickling up my neck, hairs standing on end, and chills cascading through my body. This guy radiated evil. He looked at me with his sleazy smile and $5,000 suit, and said, "All will be understood in good time." I could see the evil behind his eyes. This man was a predator, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I knew from the moment we made eye contact that I was either going to end up in a body bag, or that I would have to convince this scum that I was on his side. I waved at the security guards as we left the building. The nice thing about getting shot at for a living is that you learn how to keep your composure in dangerous situations. I wasn't about to show this man any fear or weakness. He walked me to a large black van, which was parked near the front entrance to the building. 4 guys jumped out and ushered me into the backseat. They were his security team, but they looked more like goons than soldiers. All 4 were very large men and had matching tattoos on the left side of their necks. It appeared to be a triangle or pyramid. If you're in a profession that practices violence for long enough, you learn how to size people up quickly. These guys were highly trained. Likely former special forces and clearly not American based on their accents. The driver started the van and we began moving toward the main gate on post. My captors pretended to be friendly, making small talk and avoiding my questions. As soon as we were off post, they changed. The large bald-headed bastard next to me elbowed me in the face. The others put zip ties on my wrists and ankles and threw a black hood over my head. One of them then struck me with something in the neck, and I passed out instantly. I woke up in a pitch black 6x6 room. No toilet, no bed, no freedom. I couldn't even see my hand inches from my face. Well, fuck, I said aloud. I began to feel along the wall and floor for any possible escape. Nothing. The walls felt somewhat like glass, but the texture seemed to move and ripple with the motion of my hands. It was like moving your hand along the top of water, but the wall behind was much too firm for that. It didn't budge when I shouldered it, and I was unable to find a door anywhere along the wall. I decided to lay on the floor and think through my situation. I began to think of my wife and mom, but pushed them out of my mind immediately. CRC taught me to concentrate on the moment and not allow my beautiful memories to break me. Those memories can be utilized to stay alive, but you shouldn't dwell on them or they will likely do the opposite. The sooner you accept that you're dead, the better off you will be. That acceptance makes it easier to fight. I began to think through the situation in my mind, deciding how to present myself to my captors. I knew this was likely about Task Force M, and knew that my captors were not fans. Do I carry myself in my usual manner, confident, strong-willed, and dangerous? The advantage to this is, if they know anything about me, which they likely do, they'll be confident that I'm not hiding my true self. Or do I pretend to be a pushover and passive, making them feel superior and making them doubt my capability to serve on TFM? I decided to blend the two, displaying my true personality but dumbing down my knowledge and intelligence. Lieutenant Colonel Williams once told me, a blunt object is much less dangerous than a well-informed warrior. So, I became the blunt object. You need to understand that I was being drugged for the rest of my time in this compound. I believe they were using 3 drugs. The first was a sort of truth serum, which didn't seem to affect me. The second was meant to break me by causing incredible pain. The third was some sort of hallucinogenic, which caused visual and auditory hallucinations. I believe I was able to sort through what was real and what wasn't, based on my ability to feel physical touch. But I have no way to support my claims, and no way to know if the drugs affected me more than I realize. Maybe you can help me sort through the past 5 months. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang and a whooshing sound. It didn't sound mechanical, more like magnets moving something, as if the walls being moved were not physically touched in the process. Bright red lights flashed on. I was standing in the middle of a giant room, half a mile long and 150 feet high. I had not left my prison cell, but I was somehow no longer standing in it. There was no evidence of where the walls and ceiling had gone. Cubes, like the one I was being held in, were littered throughout the room. They seemed to contain absolute darkness. The red lighting seemed to crawl around them, blotted out by the black within. It was clear that, if there were occupants in them, they could neither hear nor see me. The red lights flooded the entire room, making it appear to be soaked in blood. A foul stench was in the air, like blood, shit and vinegar mixed together. The feeling of absolute evil surrounded me. It was almost enough for me to immediately crack. I felt like I was somewhere that no human is meant to see. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning the room and realizing that I was surrounded by at least 2,000 guards. They were wearing all black, with gear resembling that of elite special forces units. They had ballistic helmets, plate carrier vests, and additional protection up and down their legs. All wore ballistic masks. Some had painted the masks to appear as skeletons. Some painted their masks to look like devils. All seemed happy to be here. I could sense that they were giddy to begin torturing me. John Smith stood in front of me. He still had the same $5,000 pinstripe suit on. He was around 5'9", with pale white skin and a slightly plump body. He had the scariest fucking grin and kept licking his lips like he was looking at a steak. He was flanked by 2 huge men. Each had to be at least 6'8". Both had long black cloaks on. They reminded me of Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. I started to think that I really must be tripping balls when I noticed the weapons in their hands. They looked like long swords, but the blade appeared to contain a black liquid that slushed back and forth, acting as if it had a life of its own. A plume of black smoke was emanating from the weapons, seemingly dancing toward their leader. Fear. They're putting on a show to break me, I thought to myself. I rattled off my name, rank, serial number, and birthday. That's what all soldiers are trained to say when interrogated. "Cut the shit, Mike," John said. "I'll make this easy on you if you tell us what you know. Where is Task Force M?" He was clearly enjoying this. He remained motionless, but his eyes had an air of delight to them. "I'll do you one better. Why is Task Force M?" I responded, smiling like I was clever. Apparently, he wasn't fond of my Drax references, because pain suddenly electrified my body, dropping me to the floor. I was hit with the most intense pain imaginable. It felt like my skin was melting and my blood would boil through my pores. My head felt like it was going to pop, and my internal organs felt as if they were being slowly ripped apart. I heard a hum, then a click, and the pain stopped. I rose from my knees, glancing down to ensure my body was still intact. I went back to attention and stared John in the eye, pretending that I wasn't impressed by the torture. "Remember, you're a big dumb ape," I thought to myself. "What do you want?" I said, playing dumb. "Where am I? People are waiting for me. Kidnapping a US Army major is probably not a great idea." "You're in hell," he interrupted. "My hell. I'm the king of this place, and I'm protected by my demons." His security team all yelled in unison as I was dropped by the intense fiery pain again. "You're going to tell us what you know, or you'll never get out of here." "I'm not afraid of death, but I also don't have anything to hide," I said, bracing for the next blast of pain. "I won't do or say anything that puts my rangers at harm, though," I yelled. I was concentrating on my life as a ranger, not my life within TFM. Always stick to a half-truth if you're ever in captivity. It makes it much easier to lay your lies. "I don't care about your rangers, and you will tell me everything you know about TFM," he said calmly. "I've always had this gift, or curse, depending how you look at it. Only 3 people know about it: my wife, mom, and aunt. Since I was a teenager, I've been able to look into people's eyes and know what type of person they are. Generally, the dominating force in their life shows through. I'm not telepathic or empathic. I can just see who that person is. I see what good or evil is the dominating force in their life. I've seen a bit of everything in the eyes of others: violence, apathy, greed, pedophilia, bigots, occultists. The ability is so intense and disheartening that I often avoid looking people in their eyes. It's exhausting seeing so much evil and so little good." John's eyes were like nothing I'd ever seen. They didn't look human. The physical eyes were those of a normal human. But what lay behind the eyes was demonic. I was looking at the ultimate predator, one that did not see people as anything more than ants, a creature that has no capacity to do good. I was falling to my knees in despair on the inside. The dread, fear, and evil he emanated was much worse than that of the giants. This being could break humans by simply standing in their presence. I decided that, if I was going to die, I might as well put up a fight. I rushed the guard nearest to me, narrowly avoiding the asp as he swung at my head. I grabbed his wrist and torqued it to the left, slamming him to the ground. I got in a few punches to his throat, which was the only place without body armor, prior to being dropped with the boiling sensation again. I realized that the guard had a patch on his right arm. The red lighting made it difficult to see clearly, but it appeared to be the all-seeing eye. The pyramid was surrounded by the letters O-N-W. "Bring back his cage," John said. "Let him marinate for a few days." To my astonishment, my cage seemed to come directly out of the ground. Nothing appeared to be moving the walls or ceiling. They simply floated into position and formed around me. The walls looked clear, except for the liquid pulsating inside. The liquid looked like black ink, bouncing rhythmically like a heartbeat. The walls and ceiling slammed shut around me, trapping me in eternal darkness again. I tried to yell and pound the walls, but it sounded like I was underwater. No one was going to hear me, and the walls felt harder than steel. Then, they started. The fucking noises. I think the noises rotated every 12 hours, but I'm not sure since there was no way to gauge time. At first, they played a high-pitched shrieking sound, like nails on a chalkboard. This seemed to go on endlessly. It was so intense that my eardrums felt as if they would explode. Next was the sound of babies, crying in agony. It sounded as if they were being tortured, mixed in with cries of neglect. The final sound that was rotated in was that of puppies being tortured. I'm not going to lie. That one fucked me up. I lay on the ground and tried to put my fingers in my ears, but the sounds were too deafening. So I tried to create a pattern of the noises in my mind. Instead of hearing puppies crying, I would try to come up with rhythms and think of the syllables in the sounds. That seemed to give me a microscopic bit of peace. Then, the crazy shit started to happen. The music suddenly cut out, and my prison cell became illuminated. The light grew so powerful that I had to cover my eyes with my forearm. A massive figure was suddenly standing before me. It was as if the ceiling to my cell was suddenly pushed higher to accommodate this giant humanoid figure. I stood up, my head barely eclipsing this thing's torso. He must have been 10 to 12 feet tall, wearing a white robe with a silver breastplate and silver armor along his shins and arms. His armor was adorned with gold symbols that seemed to pulsate with each breath. He had a massive sword that was sheathed by his side. He looked Persian, with curly black hair, a large, well-groomed beard, and olive skin. He was ripped, but wasn't as bulky as the giants I had fought. It looked like he was built for speed and power. Essentially, he looked like the ideal soldier. Light seemed to radiate from his body, which was essentially bright above his head. White wings were furled behind his back. He shook them gently, as a bird does after flight. Still in fight mode, I looked into his bright blue eyes as I gained the courage to say, "It isn't going to be pretty, but I'll make you work for my death." The being chuckled a bit, and his booming voice said, "You'll have no fight from me, Ranger. In fact, we have fought side by side in many battles." I looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Do you not remember me?" he said. "I was the one that saved you from that abomination. It was not a dream. Your soul was in Sheol for a brief time, before I lifted you from that purgatory. The dream I had, after killing my first giant, rushed back to me." I tried to crack a smile and said, "Thanks for that. That giant seemed a bit pissed at me." He boomed the loudest, most affectionate laugh that I've ever heard, and said, "My name is Yura, and I've been with you since before you were born. I protected you while you grew and fought by your side, even when you couldn't see me. Your fight is not over, in this world or the next, as long as you hold firm to your faith." I began to ask what he meant by this world or the next, but he stopped me. He took a knee, resting his hand on my shoulder. The weight of his hand caused me to lean to that side. He looked me in the eye with an expression of mourning. "You will one day, as a brother," lead me in battle. But I can't take you out of here. The I Am desires that you experience your time here, for it will provide you the strength you need in future fights. He is always with you, as am I. Do not bend to the captor's will. Many souls depend on you. I glanced to Yura's arm, where I noticed a long gash. The meat was pulled apart, and blood was slowly trickling down his waist. When I looked back at him, he was gone. The room quickly turned pitch black. Alarms suddenly sounded as the walls to my cell folded into the ground, and I was spilled back into the large room, illuminated by the red lights once again. To my horror, John, my captor, rushed into the room. He did not seem to be moving like a human though. It was as if he was floating at the speed of sound, a plume of black smoke that traveled half a mile in an instant. His body suddenly formed in front of me. "Where is he?" he screamed. "Where is who?" I responded. "That enemy of the Order, Yura," he said, nearly choking when he pronounced the name. I suddenly noticed that John had a large gash on his chest, and that his face was bloodied and bruised. The bodies of his guards littered the room. It was a massacre. There must have been 24 bodies scattered on the floor and in the rafters. Some were missing heads, some appeared to be cut in half, others were missing multiple limbs. All were clearly dead. There were pools of blood everywhere. The sight was almost mesmerizing, since the color of blood matched perfectly with the flood of the red lights. "Whoa, someone really fucked you clowns up, didn't they?" I said, while I laughed at him. "Big mistake." He picked me up above his head, clenching my throat with one hand. He was shaking violently and seemed to be trying to snap my neck. I could feel my life slipping away. But he couldn't kill me. It was as if some invisible force was stopping him from closing his hand completely. He threw me down hard, and the cell suddenly formed back around me. Over the next few months, I gathered as much intel as I could while being tortured. The guards kept referring to something called the Order. I heard accents from every part of the world. I was starved and drugged repeatedly. They would sit me in a chair every couple of hours, inject me with the drug, and then proceeded to torture me. The drug somehow enabled them to hijack my mind and make me feel death over and over again. I couldn't feel their actions with my physical body, but my nerves responded to what my brain was registering, so the pain felt real, just different than physical touch. In the simulator, they would chop me up piece by piece, only for my body to reform again. They'd make me feel as if I was dropped in the ocean, taunted, and then eaten by great white sharks. They'd light me on fire, and I would feel my body melt and would hallucinate my skin and muscle falling from the bone. They'd take me to the top of a building, thousands of feet tall, and push me off the side. It'd take minutes for me to hit the ground. I secretly preferred this one. Those minutes were the most peace I got in this place. They made me relive my worst nightmare. In 2009, I was escorting a general through Kabul one summer when a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device narrowly missed my vehicle. The Al-Qaeda fighter managed to miss my convoy and blow up 80 Afghan civilians. I had to pull security while Afghans shovel limbs, torsos, and hamburger meat off of the road. I can't think of a worse thing to see, and those bastards made me relive it every day. The worst by far was when they would simulate the giants that I killed. They would taunt me and break my body slowly. I'd then have to watch them eat my body before I would awaken, and it would start over again. I don't know why they let me go. They seemed to be on a timeline, and I heard the goons saying that there's no way I knew everything. He didn't break. No one could have withstood that. John ordered his men to strap me in a chair and told them to wipe my memory and implant a chip. If he knows anything, he'll lead us to them. Only one guard remained. He started to turn the machine on, then leaned forward inches from my face. He pulled his balaclava up slightly, revealing what looked like an ash cross underneath, the kind Catholics put on for Lent. Whispering, he said. I'm sorry, but you must remember everything. I trust you entirely. He then injected me with something, and then turned on the machine. I woke in front of my home, in uniform and 40 pounds lighter. Apparently, they told my wife and instructors that I'd been pulled for a special mission. My wife immediately knew something was wrong though. She embraced me tightly for what felt like hours and told me, "If you're ever ready to talk, I'll listen." I gave her an understanding look, which told her to never ask about what happened. That night, I woke to Lieutenant Colonel Williams standing at the foot of my bed. He said, "Well done, Ranger. I'm so proud of you. I've got a mission for you to relay to TFM and the warriors of the world. We're going to be fighting side by side soon." He put his hand on my forehead, and I could suddenly see armies converging towards somewhere in the Middle East. It looked like the entire world was getting ready to fight over one small piece of land. Lieutenant Colonel Williams pointed up, and that's when I saw armies fighting above. On one side, there were hundreds of thousands of angels with swords and shields or bows and arrows. All were glowing as brightly as Yura. It appeared as if humans were mixed within their ranks. Most appeared to be in the lead of elements of angels. They too were armed with golden swords or bows. They all marched in step, yelling something in a language I did not understand. The rhythm and language was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I heard a horn on the other side of the battlefield and saw a force of millions marching toward the angelic warriors. The enemy seemed to be led by angels. These angels looked much different though. They had black wings and their armor was all black, green swords unsheathed. They were leading giants, grotesque beasts, and humans. They sounded a horn that elicited a great fear in me. They shouted obscenities that no human could imagine. The ground began to shake under my feet as the sky turned to darkness and the moon turned red. Lieutenant Colonel Williams touched my head again, and I was back in my bed. "Get them all ready. The fight is coming soon. All must choose a side. The true warriors of God will not end their fight in your world," he said. He smiled and suddenly disappeared. That was Lieutenant Colonel Williams. But he's dead, isn't he? My wife, lying beside me in bed, said. "Yes, I held him during his final breaths and watched his body burn," I replied. "I guess it's time that I tell you what I've truly been doing for the past 12 years. We're going to have to warn the world and pray that the true warriors come forward. It appears that his world and ours will both be at war soon."
I guess I always knew there was something off about the small community I grew up in. It's all about context, I suppose. When you're a kid, you just accept what you're told, and the world around you seems normal, if only because you don't know any different. I was struck by tragedy at a young age, losing both my parents to a senseless act of violence. Naturally, this trauma defined my later life. But in the years which followed the loss of mom and dad, I only grew closer to the community around me. They're the ones who were there for me after all. My neighbors were my family. They raised me, looked after me, and helped me through my grief. And then there was Calhoun, the high priest and leader of our community. He became a father to me after my own dad died. I hung on Calhoun's every word, respected him, trusted him, loved him. It all seems so foolish now. Of course, I was raised in a cult. That's obvious to see in retrospect. But this isn't the half of it, because once I started down the rabbit hole, my old life was gone forever. Let me tell you about Bunker 1, the place where I was born and raised. We lived our entire existence underground, never seeing the sun or feeling the wind against our skin. Calhoun was the father of our community and the oldest amongst our number. He was the only one who remembered the old times, before our people were forced from the surface and took sanctuary below ground. Calhoun spoke of an apocalyptic war which killed billions and poisoned the earth, leaving the surface uninhabitable for decades to come. Calhoun used this mythology to build his religion. He promised that our piety and loyalty would be rewarded. We, the people of Bunker 1, were God's chosen ones. When the time was right, either we or our descendants would return to the surface and repopulate the earth. This was our destiny, or so Calhoun had us believe. When I finally discovered the truth, I hated Calhoun for the lies he told and for what he did to me. But now I realize he faced a difficult choice, and looking back, I have some sympathy for the old man. I understand his motives, even if I can't justify his actions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was a grown man by the time my story begins. By most accounts, I had a good life in Bunker 1. The underground facility was well provisioned and stocked. We had modern amenities, power, and enough food and water to last for decades to come. The community was tight-knit, and everyone had their assigned job or role. Calhoun was loved, respected, and, at least to an extent, feared in his position as leader. There was little dissent to his rule, and few questioned the vision of salvation he offered. And my own future was bright, at least as far as it could be inside an isolated community completely cut off from the outside world. I was engaged to be married to Sonia, an arranged marriage of course, the match being chosen by Calhoun himself. Sonia was a good woman, and I'll admit to being very fond of her, even if my heart was never truly committed to the union. It was expected for me to marry, raise children, and take on a role as a community leader. Sonia believed I was being groomed by Calhoun to take over when he was gone. The high priest was an old man and couldn't carry on forever. My future was set up in front of me. But I wasn't content. I ate powdered or canned food, breathed recycled air, worked under artificial strip lights, listened to Calhoun's repetitive sermons, and looked at murals of blue skies, green fields, and tall trees painted on the bunker's concrete walls. This had been the norm for my entire life. And yet, I now felt there was something very wrong with the small enclosed world I inhabited. I explained it to Sonia whilst we were eating our rice in the dining hall. I sat across from her, the two of us sharing our own table in a room filled with our neighbors, all of us dressed in identical light blue tracksuits. "Doesn't it strike you as odd?" I asked, catching my fiancé's eye as I spoke. "We live underground but have everything we need to live comfortably. Food, clean water, medicine, electricity, refrigeration, plumbing, spare parts for whatever breaks down, and even weapons to defend ourselves with. It just doesn't add up. Sonia wasn't interested in debating me, however. She merely rolled her blue eyes and flicked back her blonde hair before answering abruptly. I don't know, Eddie. Why are you always asking questions? I shrugged my shoulders whilst playing with my food, somewhat annoyed by her lack of support or interest. I'm just curious, that's all, I replied. Well then, you should ask the high priest, she said confidently. He has all the answers. I did ask Calhoun, and his answers made sense. He explained that our predecessors had known war was coming and built the bunker accordingly, kitting out the underground facility with all the supplies and amenities the survivors would ever need, and stocking the stores with enough supplies to last for generations. Bunker 1 was designed to facilitate the long-term survival of its inhabitants. I'll never forget the calm and confident manner in which Calhoun explained such things as he took on his parental role, brushing back his white hair with his hand and smiling amicably through his yellow teeth. His words seemed sincere, but I'd known the old man for far too long and had learned his tricks. I saw something in his face at the end of that conversation, a twinkle in his eye which told me he was lying. It was around that time when the nightmares began. Again, night terrors were nothing new for me. I'd suffered from them since childhood as a direct result of witnessing my parents die, but these dreams were different, chilling and surreal. I had the distinct feeling I was being constantly watched, with a dark, faceless figure standing over me, out of reach, but observing my every move and reading my every thought. It was a chilling, terrifying feeling. Still, I might have written this all off as paranoia, or perhaps cabin fever. After all, I had no real evidence and no way of proving that Calhoun's story wasn't true. That was until the rats arrived. I vividly recall the first rodent I saw whilst carrying out a stock take in the stores. I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw the big brown rat sitting on the shelf, bold as anything as he stared right at me. They started out in the air ducts and vents, made their way into the food stores, and eventually infiltrated the communal areas, dining hall, and even our personal bunks. This was the greatest crisis our community had faced since the invasion during my childhood. Calhoun took the infiltration very seriously. He warned the community members not to approach the troublesome rodents, claiming they were dangerous and carried diseases. The high priest organized a small team of hunters from his loyalist henchmen. They set about exterminating the rats with a murderous zeal. I didn't share Calhoun's enthusiasm for the killing spree, however. One of the rodents began following me around, a brown male rat who almost seemed tame. I first saw him in the stores, then in the offices where I was working, and finally in my bunk room. I took to feeding the rat scraps and crumbs, although I never saw him eat. Still, I didn't make any effort to harm the rodent, nor did I report his presence to the hunters. In fact, I took a liking to the small creature and looked forward to seeing him scurry out from the air vents. I even gave him a name, Roland the rat. But the wider implication of the rodent infestation wasn't lost on me. I spoke to Sonia about my theory, not in the crowded dining hall, but while we were courting in private inside her bunk, a part of the premarital ritual. I'll confess, it wasn't my best pillow talk and certainly killed the passion of the moment, but I needed to talk to someone, and I thought I could trust my fiancé. Calhoun isn't telling us the truth. You know that, don't you? Sonia shook her head in frustration, pulling the sheet to cover her naked body. I could already tell she didn't want to have this conversation, but I persevered nonetheless, hoping I could get through to her. The rats, that's what I'm talking about. Where did they come from? From the air ducts, obviously, Sonia replied whilst looking down at her toes. I mean, before that, I snapped, my frustration seeping through. These rodents aren't native to our bunker. That means they must have come from the surface. So if they can survive topside, then we can too. Sonia looked at me like I was crazy, sitting up in bed whilst her blue eyes bulged. What the hell are you talking about, Eddie? You know it's not safe out there. We'll die if we leave this bunker. That's what Calhoun says, I shot back. We've trusted him blindly all these years, but the rats prove he's been lying to us. Sonia exploded at this statement, rising from the bed and standing over me, wearing nothing but a white bedsheet, her eyes full of fury as she shouted me down. This is bullshit, Eddie, Sonia screamed. I don't know what's got into you, but I won't stand for this talk. The High Priest is our leader. He's protected me, protected you all these years. We owe him everything. I didn't have any response to her tirade, instead looking away and silently staring at the bare wall. Damn you, Eddie, Sonia cried out, whilst angry tears rolled down her cheeks. Damn you to hell. With that, she stormed out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I knew from this moment that we'd never be man and wife. We were on entirely different wavelengths, and I couldn't trust Sonia any longer. I don't know for sure, but I strongly suspect Sonia told Calhoun all about my lack of faith. The High Priest asked me to stay behind after the next morning's sermon, calmly requesting that I sit and talk with him under the painted mural depicting green fields, blue skies, and an orange sun, which adorned the back wall of the temple directly behind Calhoun's pulpit. Now then, Edward, he began, holding my gaze as he assumed the role of a well-meaning patron. What's all this I'm hearing? Honestly, I'm rather concerned about you, young man. I was taken aback, almost stuttering out my response. I don't understand, sir. Rats, Calhoun blurted out, louder than I would have expected him to. You've become obsessed with these damn rats, and you've been spreading your ridiculous theory. Is this not true? Suddenly, I felt I was subject to an inquisition. I was just wondering where the rats came from, I answered defensively. Is it so wrong to ask questions? It is when you're spreading conspiracies which cause dissent in my community, was Calhoun's firm response. Let me tell you, Edward, these rodents do not come from the surface. Rats have lived underground with us since day one. They've come to Bunker 1 because their food supply has been exhausted. Now they're eating through our stores and chewing up our wiring. This cannot stand, Edward. The rodent infestation is an existential threat to our community and must be stomped out. I nodded my head. It was hard to argue with the High Priest's logic. Still, there was one thing I didn't understand. You say the rats' previous food supply ran out. That means they must have come from... Yes, Calhoun replied solemnly. The rodents have migrated from Bunker 2. The mere mention of that godforsaken place brought a chill down my spine. My head was suddenly filled with nightmarish images, buried memories from my childhood of the invasion of '08 and the brutal murders of my mom and dad. Calhoun surely must have realized the impact of this revelation, and he softened his tone whilst speaking his next words. It's my fault, really. I've felt responsible for you since your parents died, and I've shielded you from certain uncomfortable truths. That ends now, Edward. You've been kept off the guard roster for too long. But now you must do your duty, young man. From tomorrow, you'll be working with Nicholas at the barricade. He'll show you the ropes. My jaw dropped. I was disgusted by Calhoun's instruction and realized this new duty was surely meant as a punishment. I wanted to speak out, to shout that I wouldn't do it, but I found myself unable to speak. I simply sat defeated as Calhoun stood and began to walk away, pausing only to pat me on the back and speak in my ear. I think this experience will be a real eye-opener for you. Good luck, Edward. Calhoun was right about that, at least. My eyes were opened during the days which followed, but not in the way the High Priest had anticipated. Less than 12 hours later, and I was at my new post, shivering in the cold and dark tunnel as I took my lead from Nick, a veteran guard and Calhoun loyalist. I looked to my comrade, gray-haired and sturdy, dressed in the standard blue tracksuit and with a loaded crossbow slung over his shoulder. Nick gave the appearance of a grizzled veteran tasked with defending the border from an ever-threatened barbarian attack. He looked at me under the dim light with a mix of contempt and suspicion, and I suspect Nick wasn't happy about my arrival at his post. We stood in front of the barricade crudely constructed from sheet metal and stared down the long and narrow corridor, dimly illuminated by failing lights in this unmaintained section of the vast underground complex. The tunnel was the only link between bunkers 1 and 2, and thus it had to be kept under constant guard. I had a good reason to fear what lay at the far end of the tunnel, and that fear was due to the invasion of 08. That's when the Bunker 2 people had attacked en masse, piling through the narrow tunnel, pillaging and slaughtering as they came. Our side rallied under Calhoun's leadership, and eventually the attack was beaten back, but many died during the savage battle, including Mom and Dad. I remember my mother telling me to hide as the invaders smashed down our door. Father tried to fight them, but there were too many. They cut that down first and then went for my mom. The rest is a blank in my memory. All I can remember is the blood and bodies that wouldn't wake. It was hours before rescue finally came. We knew little about Bunker 2 and its inhabitants. They came down here at the same time we did, but something went very wrong in their community. In Bunker 1, we call ourselves the Beautiful Ones. Rather arrogant, I thought, but the name was Calhoun's idea. Meanwhile, Bunker 2's people were the Fallen, the Barbarians. Whilst our community was well ordered and relatively comfortable, Bunker 2 had fallen into violent anarchy. The invasion of 08 was their attempt to take what we had. They failed, and there hadn't been another attempt in the many years since. But the threat remained, and the guard had to be maintained. Contacts are pretty rare these days, Nick explained in a gruff voice. Occasionally, 1 or 2 will come down the corridor, but they scare pretty easy. Still, they're sneaky bastards, and you always need to be on your guard. What about the rats? I asked. Rats? Nick replied in a puzzled tone. Yeah, Calhoun said they came from Bunker 2. Well, they didn't come through here, Nick said defensively. Probably through the air ducts. Anyway, don't worry about it, kid. I'm going to get some shut-eye. You need to take the first shift. I felt a cold shudder whilst glancing down the dark tunnel, focusing on a flickering light in the distance. What happens if I see one? Nick scoffed as he passed me the crossbow. It's not likely, but if you do see someone approach, shout a warning. Usually that's enough to scare them off. If they keep coming, you shoot. Shoot? I exclaimed in shock. We don't screw around anymore, Nick replied with a smirk. Not since 08. Orders are shoot to kill. But don't worry, kid. Odds are you'll have a long, boring night. Just don't fall asleep, okay? Hours passed, Nick snoring as he lay on his makeshift bunk behind the barricade whilst I kept watch. Nick was almost right. Most of the shift was quiet. I was a bag of nerves, jumping at every sound and shadow. But nothing happened. Until it did. During the early hours, I saw movement in the darkness. A shape moving through the dim light. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. But then I saw a figure emerging from the shadows and running towards me. I raised the crossbow to my shoulder, trying to control my fear as I shouted out, "Don't come any closer. I'm armed." The figure either didn't hear or didn't listen. I could see him now under the tunnel's failing lights. The interloper was a kid, maybe in his teens. He was dressed in a dark red tracksuit, the standard uniform of the Bunker 2 people. Although I noted how his outfit was ripped and soiled. The kid himself was skinny, his skin pale and eyes filled with hunger and desperation. "Don't you hear me?" I cried out. "Stop now and turn the hell around. I mean it." "Please don't shoot," the kid pleaded as he abruptly stopped running and held up his hand defensively. "I just want food, that's all." He was only 10 yards away from me now. A single squeeze of the trigger and the bolt would be lodged in the kid's chest. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill an unarmed young man. My hands were shaking as I clutched hold of the crossbow. We stared at each other across the gap, and for a moment, everything froze. But a second later, I heard a gruff voice from my rear. Nick had awoken from his slumber. "Shoot him, Eddie. He's crossed the line. You have to finish it." The kid's eyes bulged in terror as he pleaded for mercy. "I'm sorry. I just wanted food. But I'll go back. I'll go back." "Too late, asshole," Nick replied cruelly. "You should have listened to the first warning. Now we've got to make an example out of you. Shoot him, Eddie." But I wouldn't. "No, this isn't right. He's not a threat." "It doesn't matter," Nick replied, the fear now coming into his voice. "The High Priest's orders are clear." "Calhoun wouldn't want this," I shot back, looking over my shoulder whilst keeping the crossbow trained on the kid. "I'll take the prisoner to him. Calhoun will show mercy. I know it." I was winging it. Didn't know what I was doing. But I couldn't let this kid die. Nick was uncertain now. He wasn't happy with this change of protocol. Clearly, it scared him. "Fine," he finally answered. "You take the prisoner back and I'll stay here. But on your head be it, Eddie." I nodded, motioning for the kid to move and noting the relief in his hungry eyes. The Bunker 2 prisoner didn't give me any problems on the march back home. I guess he was just grateful to be alive. I asked him questions but got few answers. The kid's name was Kyle. He was scared, hungry, and running from some unspecified horror in his home bunker. I expected Calhoun to be angry at my disobedience, but never thought he'd take it so far. The High Priest's initial fury at his midnight service being interrupted was followed by a hasty order for his henchmen to gather the entire community in the temple. All 102 of my neighbors, from the youngest infants through to the elderly. I saw them all pile into the overcrowded place of worship, assembling under the mural of the great outdoors. There was Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, the nice couple who lived in the bunk next to me, with their infant son Isaiah. Beside them stood Owen, the head engineer in charge of the water purifiers, and Yasmin, the kind-hearted head teacher at the community's small school. And amongst the crowd was Sonia. Our eyes met through the chaos, and I saw nothing but hostility. I realized then that something significant had changed. These were no longer my friends and neighbors. They were strangers to me now. Calhoun stood at the pulpit, watching over his faithful. Meanwhile, 2 of his henchmen, Duncan and Mo, kept a tight hold of Kyle, the terrified prisoner from Bunker 2. As for me, I was reduced to the status of a paralyzed observer, unable to act as events played out in front of my eyes. Once the crowd had fully assembled, Calhoun cleared his throat and spoke out to capture their full attention, his booming voice filling the hall. "My faithful, my children, it is with great regret that I call you here tonight. But alas, I've been left no choice." He paused, staring at me with anger and disappointment in his hard eyes, as he pointed me out to the crowd. "Brother Edward has betrayed us. Foolishly, he disobeyed orders and brought this into our fold." Duncan and Mo dragged Kyle forward. The kid tried to fight, but was too weak. "This invader has come from Bunker 2, Calhoun announced with a barely concealed rage in his voice. "He is corrupted by the evil which dwells in the fallen bunker. Many of us are old enough to remember their invasion in 08, when these savages slaughtered our friends and family members without provocation or mercy." A wave of angry murmurs arose from the crowd, and more than a few hateful glares were cast in my direction. "Clearly, this intruder is a spy sent by the barbarian leaders of Bunker 2. He cannot be allowed to return and report what he's seen. We must make an example of him." A roar of approval went up from the bloodthirsty mob. Calhoun shushed his people before calling out 6 names, ordering them up to his pulpit. There, he handed them 6 daggers. It was clear what the intention was, and one of the 6 was Sonia. I cried out and tried to push forward to stop the savagery, but I was grabbed from behind and held back. The kid squirmed and begged for mercy, but he would find none. One by one, the executioners stepped forward and stabbed Kyle repeatedly in his chest and stomach. The poor kid screamed in agony, losing strength as his young blood spilled on the temple floor. When it was Sonia's turn, she paused briefly to look in my direction. Our eyes locked, and I swore I could see apprehension and fear in her pale face. Sonia didn't want to do this, but she didn't have the strength to go against the mob. I could only watch in awestruck horror as my ex-fiancé stabbed the dying Kyle in the guts, finishing the brutal ritual and ending the innocent kid's life. And I fell to my knees, crying out as angry tears rolled down my cheeks. I was surprised that they let me walk away from the murder scene. Frankly, I have expected for the mob to turn on me next. I still wonder whether they would have killed me if Calhoun gave the order. I'd grown up with these people, considered them family. Hell, Sonia was going to be my wife, but I wasn't one of them anymore. Not after that night. Still, Calhoun didn't throw me to the mob, and I was allowed to return to my bunk under their hateful glares. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw Kyle's brutal murder all over again. I lay on my hard mattress and stared up at the ceiling. It was hardly a surprise when I saw my bedroom door slowly open and a large figure creep in, his face hidden by the darkness. I didn't move an inch, pretending to sleep to draw the intruder into a false sense of security. I saw the knife in his hand as he slowly advanced, and then his grizzled face was illuminated by the light from the corridor. It was Nick, and he'd come here to kill me. I waited until the last possible second to move, allowing Nick to plunge his knife harmlessly into my mattress. Next, I hit Nick with all the force I could muster, knocking my would-be assassin down to my bedroom floor. A desperate life and death struggle ensued as we fought each other for supremacy. I don't know how, but somehow I got hold of the knife and I plunged the blade into Nick's chest, through his ribcage, and into his heart. Nick collapsed heavily against the wall, his eyes filled with shock and pain as a crimson tide poured from his wound. He looked up at me in the last, opening his mouth in an attempt to speak. Instead, Nick's mouth filled with blood and his eyes rolled up into his skull. And then he died. I still held the bloody knife in my shaking hand when suddenly the bile rose up my throat and I vomited on the floor. I had killed a man, a member of the community. Yes, it had been self-defense, but that wouldn't matter. There was no way back for me after this. I stumbled out of my bunk room and into the corridor, still in a daze and not sure what to do. But I didn't get far, because Calhoun was out there waiting for me. The gray-haired, sharp-eyed man stood in the well-lit corridor, wearing his standard blue tracksuit and covering me with a loaded crossbow aimed at my chest. Calhoun saw the bloody knife in my hand and didn't even seem surprised. "Nicholas is dead then," he said without much emotion. The words almost stuck in my throat as I replied, "You sent him to kill me." "Yes," Calhoun replied with a nod, whilst keeping his finger firmly on the trigger. "Nicholas should have taken charge at the barricade. This was his mess to clear up, but alas, he has failed." "Now you'll have to do your own dirty work," I snarled in defiance. Surely, Calhoun would kill me, but yet he hesitated. "It didn't need to get to this," Calhoun said with a sad frown. "You should have kept your head down and followed the rules." He shook his head, before lowering the crossbow ever so slightly. "Who am I kidding?" Calhoun continued with a thin smile. "I always knew you were too smart for this charade, Edward. It was only a matter of time before you saw through the gaps." My jaw dropped as I considered the implications of his words. "So you've been lying to us?" I stated with some satisfaction. Calhoun gnashed his teeth before answering. "Bunker 1 may have been based on falsehoods, but whatever lies I've told are necessary for our continued survival. But that's irrelevant now. You are no longer part of this community, Edward. I could shoot you down where you stand, but I can't bring myself to do it. I'm going to give you a head start. 5 minutes before I sound the alarm. Go forth and seek the answers you desire, although I don't believe you'll like what you find." Calhoun raised his crossbow again, his eyes hardening. He was giving me a chance to live, and I was determined to take it, sprinting down the corridor and out of sight. With the bulkhead door to the surface sealed shut, there was only one other place I could go: back to the barricade. Soon I was standing at the barrier of sheet metal and once again staring down the ominous corridor. The lights were flickering and the tunnel appeared even more foreboding. My nostrils even picked up on a foul smell coming from somewhere down there. A stink of creeping death. Every instinct in my body told me not to go down that godforsaken tunnel. But what choice did I have? I briefly considered returning to Bunker 1 and trying to persuade the others of Calhoun's deceit. But I knew this would never work. Still, I hesitated, frozen to the spot as I imagined the horrors before me. But then I saw him, Roland the rat, climbing over the barricade and squeaking at me as he made his way down the corridor. I swear my rodent companion stopped and looked back, motioning for me to follow him. And I did so, mustering the courage to cross the border and march into the unknown. Meanwhile, the sirens of Bunker 1 blared behind me, and I knew I couldn't go back. I knew next to nothing about Bunker 2 before I entered the subterranean purgatory. It was an alien place in my mind, a hostile territory where monsters dwelt. And when I reached the end of the connecting tunnel, I didn't know what to expect. As it turned out, the differences between the two bunkers were subtle at first, but became more apparent the deeper I explored. The underground shelter was a sprawling network of concrete and metal, one of seemingly endless corridors and sub-bunkers. At first inspection, it was much the same as my home in Bunker 1. Certainly, the two facilities were constructed by the same architects. Bunker 2 was significantly larger than 1, however, built to accommodate hundreds. And yet, it was some time before I ran into any people, which suggested there had been a substantial population crash. Honestly, I appreciated my home the farther I progressed into the second bunker. Our facility was tidy and well maintained. It even had touches of color in the form of the murals Calhoun had painted on our walls. Not so in Bunker 2, where the walls were gray and drab. What's more, everything over here seemed to be in a state of disrepair. From flickering or non-functional lights, leaking pipes, smashed-in doorways, and machinery broken down and left to rust. Frankly, I was amazed the facility was still inhabitable. And yet, the air was breathable, and there was no significant light for me to navigate my path. More concerning were the signs of violence I witnessed: broken barricades in lonely corridors, scorch marks on the walls, and dried blood on the floors. It brought a cold chill to my bones when I imagined the horrors that had once occurred in these halls and corridors. I saw no human beings during the first few hours of my exploration. But I wasn't alone. Roland was my companion during the trek. Sometimes the rodent disappeared from view for several hours, scuttling off into the shadows or down the pipes. But he always came back, appearing under my feet and looking up at me with his big brown eyes. It was the strangest thing, because it often seemed that Roland was guiding me, leading me deeper into the bunker and directing me towards something. Or perhaps I was just losing my sanity. In any event, it was about 6 hours before I encountered the first human resident of Bunker 2. And this meeting was not a good one. I saw the shambling figure emerging from the corridor behind me and almost jumped out of my skin. The person who emerged was an elderly woman, her hair long and white, and her skin wrinkled. Her red tracksuit was ancient, worn, and hanging off her thin and frail body. She limped towards me with her bony hands held out. But it was her bloodshot eyes that shocked me. Her eyes filled with hunger, desperation, and madness. The elderly woman wasn't much of a physical threat, but there was something about her which made me feel unsettled. I still had the knife I'd taken off Nick, but the dagger was tucked into my waistband, and I was reluctant to use it again, even in self-defense. So, I attempted to resolve the situation with my words. "Hello, ma'am. Do you need help?" The woman's eyes widened, and she opened her crusty lips to speak in a hoarse voice. "Hungry. I'm so hungry." I shrugged my shoulders. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any food." I watched in horror as her face twisted, and she snarled her next words. "Meat. You are meat." She lurched forward aggressively, and I reacted in instinct, pushing her down to the hard floor. The woman fell hard and I heard something crack. Maybe she'd broken something, but the woman's hostility towards me didn't diminish. She hissed like a cat whilst glaring up at me with hate in her eyes, grasping out with her claw-like hand. I'll confess that I broke in that moment, fleeing down the corridor as the fallen woman screamed after me. I left the crazed and starving lady in my wake, but was left wondering what had happened in Bunker 2 and how far its people had fallen. Unfortunately, I soon got my answer. Another corridor with flickering lights, except there was a foul smell down there. A rancid stink of rotting flesh. I shouldn't have gone down there. Of course, there was something horrific at the end of the corridor, but I needed to know the truth, no matter how terrible it would be. Advancing cautiously into the darkness whilst holding my nose, I soon found the source of the stench. Because there, in an abandoned bunk room set off the dimly lit corridor, was a human corpse. The body was badly mutilated, so much so that I couldn't tell the victim's gender. The skin and much of the flesh was stripped away, exposing the white bones underneath. The sight and smell were so bad that I retched, but nothing came up because my stomach was already empty. I hadn't seen a dead body in many years, not since my parents were murdered. And even then, the victims of the '08 invasion were dealt with compassionately and efficiently, burned in the incinerator, as was the tradition in Bunker 1. But leaving a body out to rot seemed barbaric to me. That wasn't the worst of it, however. I forced myself to observe the bloody corpse in closer detail, hoping to find some evidence on the cause of death. At first, I assumed the victim had been eaten by rats. But no, the flesh hadn't been torn apart with teeth. It hadn't been sliced from the bone by a knife. This victim hadn't just been murdered. They'd been butchered. I stumbled away from the bloody scene, my whole body shaking as I was overwhelmed by feelings of revulsion and terror. The implication was obvious. The Bunker 2 people I'd encountered were starving, so clearly food was in short supply over here. But now I realized how bad it had got. Clearly, there were some who'd resorted to cannibalism. I experienced an existential dread in that moment as I fled from the scene. I'd sought out the truth. Calhoun told me I wouldn't like what I found, and he was right. How foolish I'd been. Life in Bunker 1 had been a lie, but it was safe and comfortable back home. Here, it was living hell, worse than I could have imagined. Why had I come here? Why didn't I keep my mouth shut and follow Calhoun's rule? I regretted my disobedience now, but it was too late to go back. I guess I was still in a shocked daze as I stumbled farther into the damned bunker, because I didn't spot the ambush until it was too late. Two figures darted out in front of me, blocking my path. I took a step back and instinctively made to retreat, but another two had crept up behind me, boxing me in. I reached into my waistline and withdrew my knife, even though I had little to no hope of defending myself against this quartet. Observing my opponents, I noted that they were all female, young women in red tracksuits. All four were lean and thin, but they shared a fierce and determined look, and all were armed with long steel javelins which aimed menacingly in my direction. These were tough women in the mold of Amazonian warriors. I had no doubt they could and would kill me if it came to a fight. Nevertheless, I continued to hold out my knife in a futile act of defiance. 3 of the women held the line with their spears, while the 4th, their leader, marched forward to confront me. My heart almost stopped when I saw her. I almost called out a name before I caught my mistake, because this female warrior was the spitting image of Sonia, my ex-fiancée. Sure, this rat-coated woman was leaner, tougher, and more determined, but she had Sonia's eyes, hair, and facial features. I was awestruck and speechless as the blonde-haired woman approached, holding out her spear as she came. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. I opened my dry lips and somehow found the words to reply. "Eddie. My name is Eddie." The lead woman nodded her head, as if my first name was all the information she needed. But her companions weren't convinced. "Cass, don't listen to him," shouted a dark-haired woman behind me. "He's with the Rat Pack. Has to be." "No," Cass said firmly, her hard eyes still focused on me. "He's not Rat Pack. Look at his uniform. Light blue. You're from Bunker 1, aren't you, Eddie?" I nodded my head in confirmation. "Bunker 1?" asked the third woman in confusion. "Why would you leave to come here?" I looked to Cass, but she said nothing, as clearly she expected me to answer. "I had to leave. Got in trouble with the high priest. There was nowhere else to go." "That's bullshit," cried the fourth woman. "He's a damn spy." "Maybe he is," Cass answered thoughtfully, "but we'll bring him back to camp to find out for sure." She nodded to the knife still in my hand. "I suggest you drop that, Eddie, unless you intend to take us all on." I inhaled, thinking for a moment before dropping the blade, hearing it clatter on the hard ground. Cass seemed appreciative of my cooperation. She lessened her grip on the spear and grabbed a bottle from her belt, casually tossing it into my waiting hands. "Take a drink, Eddie. I'm sure you can use one." I smiled whilst opening the bottle and drinking the cold water contained within. I thought I'd found a friend in Cass, but had no idea what awaited me back at the Amazon camp. The Bunker 2 settlement was based in a dining hall similar to the one we had back home. But while our hall was a place of peace and community, this was a room of desperation and hunger. I noted several things whilst I was frog-marched through the hall by the 4 female warriors. There were about 50 or 60 people spread throughout the space, sitting at steel tables whilst staring longingly towards the canteen. I witnessed how the children were the only ones active, and they were out of control, almost feral as they fought each other with food trays and jumped all over the tables. Their mothers made no effort to control their offspring, merely watching them with dead eyes and indifference. And it was only mothers. There were hardly any adult males, and the few men I could see were elderly and unresponsive. It seemed that this small community was run and protected by women, and this puzzled me. My curiosity got the better of me as I whispered the question to Cass, who strode by my side. "What happened to all the men?" I asked. Cass simply shrugged her shoulders before responding. "Dead mostly. Killed each other in vendettas and duels. Those who survived ran off to join the Rat Pack, and those bastards have been wreaking bloody mayhem for years." I took note of her words, but made no further comment. This was the second time I'd heard mention of the Rat Pack. I didn't know who they were, but guessed this group were bad news. I did notice how I received suspicious and hostile looks from many in the assembled crowd, and this brought back painful memories of my treatment in Bunker 1. But I tried to reassure myself that these people were simply curious. In any event, my attention was soon drawn to the canteen at the back of the hall, where a trio of beleaguered caterers emerged with trays of food. The community members responded with great enthusiasm as they piled forward, but Cass and her warriors were there to keep control. "You know the drill, people," Cass demanded. "Everyone will be served. Stand in line and wait your turn." There were grumbles from the crowd, but they eventually complied, forming an untidy line as they queued up for their breakfast. Cass tapped me on the shoulder, smiling whilst asking, "You hungry?" I nodded my head and allowed her to lead me to the back of the line, although I noted the harsh glares from those in front of me. The hostility only grew worse as I reached the front of the line and was served food by a hard-faced dinner lady. I glanced at the tiny portion of beans dished out to me and thought I was being deliberately underserved. But when I looked to the other plates, I saw we'd all received the same meager offering. There was rationing in Bunker 1, of course, but our stocks were ample and we didn't have to survive on starvation rations like these. And as I ate, I realized why the crowd were so hostile. "Why the hell does he get to eat?" cried a middle-aged woman who pointed accusingly at me. "Our children are starving. We don't have enough for another mouth," shouted another. Once again, an angry mob was turning against me. I started to back away, setting down my plate in the process. But thankfully, Cass stepped in to defend me. "Come on, people. Eddie is our guest. I invited him." "He's an outsider from Bunker 1, cried out the dark-haired warrior. "We can't trust him." The suspicious murmurs escalated, and I could tell the situation was getting out of control. So I held my hands up defensively and spoke. "I'm not staying, just passing through. I don't want any trouble." "Yes," Cass added. "He's leaving, and I'm escorting him out." This seemed to quell the mob's anger as they slowly drifted away and returned to their food. Meanwhile, Cass took me to one side, picking up her javelin before handing me back my knife. "I know some people who can maybe help you," she explained. "But we need to be careful because we'll be traveling through their territory." I nodded my head, wondering who Cass was referring to and what dangers lay ahead. But I couldn't stay here, and I had no choice but to trust her. We walked out from the dining hall and proceeded deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. I was nervous, but experienced a moment of joy when I spotted Roland scurrying along the floor ahead of us. It was the first time I'd seen the rodent in some time, and his presence brought me renewed hope. But I didn't say anything to Cass, instead waiting for her to start the conversation. "So why did you leave?" she asked abruptly as we negotiated yet another featureless corridor under failing lights. "Huh?" I said in confusion whilst looking at her. "Bunker 1, why did you leave? Are they running out of food? Or has the high priest lost control?" Not exactly," I replied, before reluctantly recounting the grisly tale of Kyle's brutal execution following his capture at the barricade. Cass didn't seem shocked or angered by my story. Instead, she merely nodded her head in grim resignation, as if such acts of brutal violence were a fact of everyday life. "You know, Bunker 2 wasn't always like this," she said thoughtfully as we continued to walk. "When I was a girl, this place was well ordered and peaceful, and we had enough food for everyone." "So what happened?" I asked. Cass shook her head, trying to control her emotions as she answered. "People got greedy, wanted more than their fair share. There was fighting, and half our food stores were looted or destroyed. We've been hungry ever since." Suddenly, something clicked in my head. "When did this happen?" I inquired. "Back in 08, was her answer. "You people invaded us that year, slaughtered us." "We were desperate," Cass replied defensively. "All we wanted was food." "My mom and dad were murdered that day," I shouted angrily. Cass took a deep breath, acknowledging my pain when she spoke next. "I'm sorry. Sorry for your loss, Eddie. Our people went too far. But you've got to understand, we all suffer under the same system. And Calhoun, your leader, he knew we were starving and didn't lift a finger to help." I nodded. This latest revelation was disappointing, but not surprising. But there was something which still puzzled me. This talk of a system that kept everyone down. "Where are you taking me?" I asked nervously. "I'm bringing you to another community, one that I think can help you and give you the answers you need." I wanted to ask more, but Cass stopped us dead in our tracks, her attention drawn by a suspicious sight or sound. "Stop. Wait," she whispered. I didn't know what Cass was reacting to, but a second later, and an arrow flew past my ear, striking the wall directly behind me. I reacted with shock, realizing I'd only been inches from death. But Cass shook me from my paralysis, grabbing my arm and shouting, "Run!" She took off down the corridor, and I followed, but we didn't make it far. A bulky figure emerged from behind a corner, striking Cass hard with a lead pipe. I stopped abruptly to face the attacker, only to be hit from behind, feeling a sharp pain in my back which forced me down to my knees. A moment later, and both Cass and I were being roughly dragged across the ground by a gang of men, thugs who cursed and laughed as they inflicted pain. They flung us inside an empty storeroom, and only then could I comprehend this grim situation. Cass and I had been ambushed, disarmed, beaten, and taken prisoner, all in a matter of seconds. 3 men were blocking the only exit from the room, a trio of fat, sweaty thugs with sadistic smirks on their lips and murder in their eyes. They all wore the standard Bunker 2 red tracksuits, but their outfits were customized by grotesque trophies, human teeth and digits hanging from strings around their necks. I looked to Cass, who lay on the floor beside me, and saw genuine fear in her blue eyes. I didn't know who these men were, but could hazard a guess. The infamous Rat Pack, hunters and cannibals of Bunker 2. A moment later, and the 3 thugs stood aside, allowing another 2 to enter the cell. The first man appeared to be the gang's leader. He had a deep scar across his cheek and a mean look in his dark eyes. Sadistic, but also intelligent. But what I noted was the crude tin crown he wore on his bald head, an unsubtle symbol of his power and position. The second man trailed behind the Rat King, and somehow his appearance was even more shocking. He was a short and ugly man with wild hair. But the real problem was what he carried on his back. A rucksack with appendages sticking out from the top. 2 severed human legs. "Well, my liege," the ferret-faced man sniveled, "we're going to have a feast tonight." "Oh no," the Rat King replied, his cruel smile widening as he looked down upon us. "This is Cass, Queen of the Amazons. We've been after her for a long time. Going to have some fun with this bitch before she dies." Then he turned to me. "And this asshole? He's from Bunker 1. Oh yes, I recognize the uniform. Many of my men have died trying to get past that damn barricade. But now we have leverage. A hostage." He snarled an order to his men. "Get them up on their feet and back to camp." The Rat King didn't get a chance to finish his sentence, because a second later, an arrow penetrated the skull of the man behind him. Suddenly, pandemonium broke out in the corridor as the Rat Pack piled out with weapons in hand. From our cell, I saw a second man fall with a javelin in his chest, and then the survivors broke and fled. "Let's go!" shouted one. "Grab the meat and run!" The Rat King cast us a hateful glare before retreating. A moment later, and our saviors arrived in the doorway. Our rescuers were a trio, and what interested me was how they wore uniforms that were a mixture of red and blue. 2 of the 3 were young warriors, a red-haired woman armed with a crossbow, and a man with olive skin who removed his spear from the chest of a dead cannibal. But their leader was an older man with gray hair, his brown eyes tired but still holding a spark of compassion. He smiled in recognition whilst holding out his hand to help Cass up to her feet. "Thanks for saving our asses, Joe," she said. "Not a problem," Joe replied. "Glad to help, but you were damn lucky we got here when we did." He frowned like a disapproving father. "What are you 2 doing out here, Cass?" I was bringing him to see you guys, she answered whilst nodding towards me. Calhoun kicked him out of the beautiful ones. Now he wants answers. Is that so? Joe said with a raised eyebrow as he looked me up and down. Well, we best get moving. The Rat King's been given a bloody nose, but he'll return, looking for payback. We need to get underground. Then I'll tell this young man everything I know. I got up on my feet, relieved to still be alive and intrigued at what this new faction would reveal to me. We quickly escaped from the killing zone, fleeing before the Rat Pack cannibals returned. Joe and his people led the way while Cass and I followed, both of us grateful to still be in one piece. I expected to see yet more bland corridors and halls, but Joe's faction didn't bring us to another section of the hellish Bunker 2, because they didn't live in the bunker. They lived under it. Turning another corner, I was shocked to see a tunnel leading downwards. Panels had been removed from the bunker floor and a passageway had been dug into the earth. I hesitated for a second as Joe and his warriors descended into the hole, but Cass followed and I went with her. I don't know how they built the tunnel network which sprawled underneath the bunker complex, but clearly much work and planning had gone into its construction. The main tunnels were wide and tall enough for two fully grown adults to walk side by side. The support beams appeared sturdy and secure, and electric lights were mounted to the walls, wired up to a power source which I guessed was located inside the bunker above. Set beside the main tunnel were rooms and halls, some appearing substantial in size. Guards were posted at intersections, and I saw people, including whole families, living underground. Ironically, this lower level seemed safer and more peaceful when compared to the chaos and savagery in the bunker above. We eventually arrived at a central hall where Joe invited us to sit, while his people served us water in tin mugs. I looked around at the red and blue clad tunnel people, the dirt walls and electric lights. Honestly, I felt overwhelmed by this new environment, but then I saw a familiar creature scurrying across the floor, which brought me some comfort. It was Roland, my rodent companion who'd followed me all the way from Bunker 1. I smiled when I saw the rat approach, but was shocked by what happened next, as one of Joe's men rushed forward and brutally smashed Roland's tiny body with a heavy club. It was crazy, but I reacted with anger, jumping up and remonstrating with the club-wielding thug. "Why did you do that?" I screamed with fury. "He was an innocent creature." The man scoffed, but it was Joe who answered. "Look closer, Eddie." I did, observing what remained of the crushed rodent. I expected to see blood and guts, but instead saw wires and circuit boards. The discovery left me shocked and confused. "I don't understand," I mumbled. Joe and Cass walked up beside me, and neither appeared surprised. "It's not an animal. It's a machine, a remotely controlled surveillance unit sent by the topside controllers." "The controllers?" I repeated in bafflement. Joe and Cass shared a knowing look before the old man spoke. "You best sit down, Eddie. We've got a lot to talk about." I did as instructed, feeling like I was through the looking glass. Honestly, I was afraid of what I was about to hear, but also exhilarated, because the truth was finally in sight. "You know Calhoun?" Joe asked. "Of course," I replied. "I was one of his favorites once upon a time, but then he cast me out." "Yes," Joe said thoughtfully. "Calhoun and I were close friends for many years. We were both part of the first generation. Not many of us left now, sadly." I raised my eyebrow in surprise. "You lived topside? Before the war?" "We did, but there was no war." My jaw dropped in disbelief. "No war? That doesn't make sense. Why else would you have gone below ground?" "We didn't come down here voluntarily," Joe said solemnly whilst lowering his head. "They put us here, trapped us in these bunkers and sealed off the doors. Why? Nobody knows for sure. Our best bet is some kind of experiment." He paused, pointing to the shattered remains of the robotic rodent. "We removed the surveillance cameras years ago, but they've become more sophisticated in keeping tabs on us. Our group moved underground in an attempt to escape their watchful eyes, not to mention the violence and chaos in Bunker 2. He sighed before continuing. "I suppose you could call our jailers benevolent. They provided ample food, water, and supplies to support a growing population. Much of the suffering inside the bunkers has been of our own doing. Take the Rat Pack as an example." My head was spinning and I felt like I could vomit. What Joe was saying sounded insane, and yet it all made sense to me. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. Calhoun? He's part of it then? He's running the experiment? Joe shook his head. "No, Calhoun's a prisoner, just like the rest of us. The Beautiful Ones was his way of trying to take back control. His cult is built on a lie, as you can now see. To be fair to my old friend, he did what he thought necessary to keep order in his bunker. But in the end, the truth will always come out." I zoned out after this, unable to focus on Joe's words. Eventually, the old man left me be as I tried to process my thoughts. But Cass sat by my side, letting some compassion seep through her tough exterior as she put her arm around my shoulder, smiled, and spoke softly in my ear. "You okay, Eddie?" I opened my mouth, but couldn't find the words to respond. It didn't matter though, because a moment later, it all went to hell. Suddenly, a man ran into the underground hall, bleeding from what looked like a stab wound as he shouted frantically, "It's the Rat Pack! They've broken through!" Suddenly, every man and woman jumped into action, grabbing hold of weapons and preparing to defend their home turf. Cass and I joined their defensive line, and even the elderly Joe took up arms. We could hear the clash of steel weapons echoing through the tunnels, and the screams of men and women struck down. And then the enemy charged inside the hall. The Rat King and a dozen of his men, their spears and blades dripping with blood of their enemies. Their leader stood at the head of the mob, his crazed eyes full of bloodlust as he scanned the crowd, searching for targets. Meanwhile, the tunnelers joined the battle. Bolts and spears flew through the air. Men fell screaming, and the survivors fought hand to hand. I lost track of my companions during the melee. Cass was fighting a weasel-faced attacker and holding her own, but Joe was soon in trouble. The Rat King went straight for the tunneler's elderly leader, and poor Joe didn't stand a chance. I saw the old man fall with a knife through his heart. The hideous Rat King howled in triumph as Joe fell, the life draining from his tired old eyes. My heart was filled with fury in that moment as I charged forward, knife in hand. The Rat King was taken off guard. I don't think he was used to his victims fighting back. He saw me late and turned, slowly, but I hit him hard, burying my blade in his throat. Shock and pain filled the monster's eyes as blood sprayed from the open wound in his neck. He stumbled across the floor for a few seconds, until his blood loss was overwhelming, and then he collapsed into a heap in the dirt. The battle continued around me for several more seconds, but then the surviving Rat Pack members saw their leader was dead, and their morale broke. "The boss is dead meat. Let's get the hell out." The surviving attackers fled, leaving their dead behind. Cass and I stood side by side, looking down at Joe's lifeless body. And in that moment, I realized that something had to change. Weeks passed before we made our move. The deaths of Joe and the Rat King had left a power vacuum in Bunker 2, one which Cass and I were able to take advantage of. It took time to reach out to all the factions and bring them under one flag, a difficult, nearly impossible task. But we managed it. Cass's Amazons, the tunnelers, the ferals, and even the surviving Rat Packers, former enemies, had become allies, and what brought them together was one thing: the truth. We spent time waiting for the right moment to strike. I wanted to avoid more bloodshed, if at all possible. Cass and I watched the barricade for several nights, waiting until both guards were asleep, before moving in quietly, overpowering and restraining both men and taking them prisoner. With this task completed, our ragtag army moved in. Calhoun had become complacent. It had been so long since the last significant attack upon Bunker 1, and their defenses were weak. His second mistake was letting me live. I'm sure Calhoun thought I'd die over there in Bunker 2. He certainly didn't expect me to come back with an army behind me, and I had an advantage that the Bunker 2 people didn't. Knowledge. I'd grown up in Bunker 1, so I knew the layout, the people, and the routines. We came in while the beautiful ones were asleep, taking them off guard. By the time my former neighbors emerged from their bunks, it was already too late. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but I'd given my soldiers strict orders not to kill. The Bunker 1 community were in a state of shock and astonished to see me back. Sonia was amongst their number. There was anger in her eyes when she saw me, and I felt sure my ex-fiancé would speak out. But all Sonia's hatred seemed to melt away once she locked eyes with Cass. Because the two women were sisters, separated at a young age, but now reunited. And they weren't the only ones. The peoples of Bunker 1 and 2 had been enemies for years. But this was an artificial divide, and ultimately we were all from the same place. But Calhoun wasn't willing to accept this. The high priest marched into the dining hall where we'd assembled the prisoners. His enforcers, Mo and Duncan, stood by his side, and all three were armed with daggers. It seemed Calhoun wasn't ready to give up. He looked at me with disappointment in his old eyes, shaking his head as he spoke. "Edward, what have you done?" But this judgmental father routine wouldn't work on me. Not anymore. I didn't respond to Calhoun, instead speaking directly to the Bunker 1 folk. "This man has been lying to us for years. Yes, he may have had his reasons, but he's a liar nonetheless. There was no war. The surface isn't uninhabitable. The truth is, we're prisoners. Our forefathers were trapped down here decades ago. Anonymous controllers have been watching us ever since, observing us like we're rats in a damned maze. And this divide, Bunker 1 versus 2, it's meaningless. We are brethren, all from the same stock, and we're all victims of the same cruel system. Only by working together can we break the wheel." I'd been practicing the speech in my head for weeks, but honestly, I didn't know how it would be received. Would the beautiful ones continue to deny reality? Would they remain loyal to Calhoun and his false vision? I looked around the faces of the people I'd grown up with and saw the doubt creeping in. It seemed there had been cracks for some time, and now it was all crumbling down. I expected Calhoun to call me the liar and defend what he'd spent his entire life building. The old man opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He looked exhausted and defeated, and perhaps even relieved that it was all over. The final blow was when Duncan and Mo, his most loyal enforcers, dropped their weapons and came over to our side. I had won, but I didn't hate the fallen high priest. I felt sorry for him. "You can still join us, Calhoun," I exclaimed in an attempt at reconciliation. "You're a victim of the system too. Help us find a way out." Calhoun laughed bitterly, waving his knife in the air as he spoke. "You stupid boy," he exclaimed. "You still don't get it, do you? There is no way out. You have no idea what you're unleashing. It's over, Calhoun. This is happening, whether you like it or not." I honestly didn't anticipate what Calhoun would do. If I had any inkling, I would have tried to stop him, but he acted too quickly. Such was the former high priest's determination. "I won't be a part of this," he cried out in defiance. Then Calhoun raised the knife to his neck, and he sliced his throat from ear to ear. Cass, Sonia, and I ran to his side. But it was already too late. Calhoun choked on his own blood, and the life went out of his eyes. I hadn't wanted anyone to die, but Calhoun made his own choice. His action wouldn't stop us. We all marched as one now. Beautiful ones, Amazons, tunnelers, and Rat Pack, all united with a common goal to break the system and escape from this man-made hell. There was only one place to go. The bulkhead doors, the steel barrier separating us from the surface. We didn't know how to break out. Not yet. But together, we would work it out. We marched as one down the final corridor, our goal in sight. But the controllers must have anticipated this scenario. I saw one, then two, then three rats emerging from the vents in the walls and ceiling. Except, they weren't rats. They were the same model as Roland, surveillance drones. But this wasn't their only purpose. Within moments, there were dozens, and then hundreds. They emerged from every crevice, coming in front and behind, soon surrounding our party. The mechanical killers surged forward in a deadly wave, opening their maws to reveal rows of razor-sharp steel teeth. One of our number fell, bit on the ankles and shins before being overwhelmed by a swarm of ruthless attackers who tore him apart. People screamed and tried to flee in a blind panic, knocking others down and crushing them in a stampede. Meanwhile, the rats kept on coming, tearing into human flesh. Many of our people fought back, smashing and slicing robotic rats with clubs and machetes. But there were so many of them. Soon, it descended into a bloodbath as Calhoun's grim warnings came to fruition. Cass, Sonia, and I formed a defensive ring, protecting the children as we prepared to fight a desperate last stand. Our plan was a disaster, as the system had fought back with unprecedented brutality. And yet, as I faced a likely death, I felt surprisingly calm. Because, although we might die today, at least we would die free. No longer prisoners, dwelling in the darkness